When the royal guards discovered a forbidden symbol around a poor healer's neck, they realized the impossible. The last survivor of a bloodline, hunted to extinction for 300 years, was standing before them, unaware she held the power to destroy kings. If you want to know how a village herb seller became the most dangerous woman in the kingdom, stay with me until the very end. And if you're watching from New York, LA, Chicago, or anywhere else in the world, drop your city in the comments and smash that like button. Let's begin. The morning fog clung to Greyhaven like a burial shroud. Lyra Thornwell knelt in the damp grass behind her cottage, fingers stained green from crushing nettle leaves into paste. The air smelled of rain and wood smoke. Around her neck, hidden beneath a worn woolen shawl, hung the only thing her mother had left her, a silver pendant shaped like a crescent moon wrapped in thorns. She had never understood why her mother made her promise to keep it hidden. "Lyra!" The shout came from the village square. She looked up, her heart sinking. Old Moran was limping toward her, clutching his side. "It's the fever again," he gasped. "Little Bess, she's burning up. Her ma's beside herself." Lyra wiped her hands on her apron and stood. "I'll come now." She grabbed her leather satchel, stuffed it with dried chamomile, willow bark, and a small clay jar of honey, then followed Moran down the narrow dirt path that wound between the cottages. Greyhaven was a frontier village, tucked into the shadow of the Ashridge Mountains. Life here was hard. The soil was rocky, winters were brutal, and the nearest city was 3 days' ride. People survived on grit, luck, and whatever remedies Lyra could scrape together from the wild. She was 24 years old and had been the village healer since she was 16, since the night her mother died in a fire that consumed their home and left Lyra with nothing but ash, grief, and a silver pendant she didn't dare take off. When they reached the square, a small crowd had gathered near the well. Lyra's stomach tightened. Crowds meant trouble. "What's going on?" she asked. Moran shook his head. "Soldiers. Came in at first light." Lyra's breath caught. Soldiers didn't come to Greyhaven. There was nothing here worth taking, nothing worth protecting. They were too far from the trade roads, too insignificant to matter. She pushed through the crowd and froze. 6 men stood in the center of the square, dressed in black leather armor trimmed with silver. Their cloaks bore the royal crest, a wolf's head crowned in iron. These weren't ordinary soldiers. They were alphas, elite warriors trained from childhood to serve the crown, faster, stronger, deadlier than any common man. Lyra had heard stories about them her whole life, how they could kill a man with their bare hands, how they answered only to the king himself. And now they were here. The leader stepped forward. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with a scar running from his left eyebrow to his jaw. His eyes were cold, calculating. "We're searching for something," he said, his voice cutting through the murmur of the crowd. "A symbol. An old one. If any of you have seen it, speak now." Silence. Lyra's fingers instinctively went to her chest where the pendant lay hidden beneath her shawl. The soldier's gaze swept over the villagers, lingering on each face. Then his eyes locked onto Lyra. She felt her heart stop. He walked toward her slowly, deliberately. The crowd parted. Lyra wanted to run, but her legs wouldn't move. "You," he said. "What's your name?" "Lyra," she whispered. "Lyra Thornwell." "And what do you do here, Lyra Thornwell?" I'm a healer." His eyes narrowed. "A healer." He reached out, and before she could react, he pulled the shawl from her shoulders. The pendant gleamed in the pale morning light. Every alpha in the square went still. The leader's face drained of color. He took a step back, his hand moving to the hilt of his sword. "Where did you get that?" he demanded. Lyra's voice shook. "It was my mother's." "Your mother's?" He stared at her as if she'd just admitted to murder. "Do you have any idea what that symbol means?" She shook her head. He turned to his men. "Send word to the king, immediately." One of the alphas sprinted toward the horses. Lyra felt the world tilting. "I don't understand. What is this? What did I do?" The leader looked at her with something she couldn't name, fear, anger, disbelief, all tangled together. "That mark," he said slowly, "belonged to the Sentinel bloodline, a line of warriors who once judged kings and commanded forces beyond the reach of any throne. They were hunted to extinction 300 years ago because their power made them too dangerous to let live." Lyra's breath came in short, shallow gasps. That's impossible. I'm just a healer. I don't have any power. Then how? He said quietly. Are you still alive? Before she could answer, a woman screamed. Lyra spun around. At the edge of the square, a group of figures emerged from the mist, masked, cloaked, moving with lethal precision. Hunters. The Alphas drew their weapons. Protect the girl, the leader shouted. The hunters charged. Steel rang against steel. Villagers scattered, screaming. Lyra stumbled backward, her mind reeling. She didn't understand what was happening. She didn't understand any of it. A hunter broke through the line and lunged toward her, blade raised. Lyra threw up her hands, and the pendant exploded with light. A wave of silver energy erupted from her chest, blasting the hunter backward. He crashed into the well with a sickening crack and didn't move. The light spread outward, forming a shimmering barrier around her. The other hunters recoiled, shielding their eyes. Lyra stared at her hands, trembling. What just happened? The Alpha leader grabbed her arm. We need to go, now. I can't. They'll kill everyone in this village if they think you're here, he said. Do you understand? Everyone. Lyra looked around at the faces she'd known her whole life. Maron, Little Bess's mother, the blacksmith, the baker. They were staring at her with fear. Fear of her. She swallowed hard. Where are we going? To the king. 3 days later, Lyra stood at the gates of the royal fortress of Ironhold. The journey had been brutal. They'd ridden through rain and mud, stopping only to rest the horses. The Alphas spoke little, and when they did, it was always in low voices she couldn't quite hear. She caught fragments. Bloodline, treaty, war, but nothing that made sense. The pendant still hung around her neck, cold and heavy. Ironhold was carved into the side of a mountain, its black stone walls rising 100 feet high. Banners bearing the crowned wolf snapped in the wind. Guards lined the ramparts, watching them approach. The gates opened. Inside, the fortress was a labyrinth of stone corridors and iron doors. Torches flickered in sconces along the walls. The air smelled of smoke and steel. Lyra felt like she'd stepped into another world. A world of violence and power, where people like her didn't belong. They climbed a spiral staircase and stopped before a massive oak door. The Alpha leader knocked twice. Enter, a voice called from within. The door swung open. The room beyond was vast, lined with maps and war banners. At the center stood a man Lyra recognized from the royal crest she'd seen all her life, King Cale Dravenhart. He was younger than she'd expected, maybe 30, with black hair tied back and eyes the color of storm clouds. He wore simple armor, no crown. But there was something in the way he stood, the way he looked at her, that made it clear he was used to being obeyed. So, he said quietly, the last sentinel. Lyra didn't know whether to bow, kneel, or run. Your Majesty, the Alpha leader said. She doesn't know what she is. She doesn't know anything. Cale studied her for a long moment. Then he gestured to a chair. Sit. Lyra sat. Cale poured 2 cups of wine and handed one to her. She didn't drink. Do you know why the sentinels were hunted? He asked. She shook her head. Because they could see the truth, he said. Not just the truth of men's words, but the truth of power itself. They could sense corruption, lies, betrayal. And their magic, he paused. Their magic could strip a man of his authority, render a crown meaningless. Kings feared them because they couldn't be controlled. I'm not like that, Lyra said quickly. I'm just a healer. You stopped 5 trained hunters with a thought, Cale said. That's not just anything. She looked down at the pendant. My mother never told me. She was protecting you. If anyone had known what you were, you'd have been killed before you could walk. He leaned forward. But now they know. And they will come for you. Who? Everyone who has something to hide. His eyes darkened. And that, I'm afraid, includes half the nobles in this kingdom. Lyra felt a chill run down her spine. So what do I do? Cale stood and walked to the window, looking out over the mountains. You have 2 choices. You can run, disappear into the wilderness, and spend the rest of your life hiding. Or, he turned to face her, you can stay. Learn what you are. Learn to control your power, and help me root out the ones who've been poisoning this kingdom from the inside. Why would you want my help? Because I've spent 10 years trying to hold this throne together, and I'm tired of fighting shadows. His voice was hard, edged with something like desperation. If you can see the truth, if you can expose the traitors without starting a civil war, then maybe we can save what's left. Lyra looked at him, really looked at him. Beneath the armor and the authority, she saw exhaustion, a man carrying a weight too heavy for one person to bear. She thought of Greyhaven, of the people she'd left behind, of the hunters who would return. "I'll stay," she said. Kael nodded slowly. "Then welcome to Ironhold, Sentinel." The next morning, Lyra woke in a room larger than her entire cottage back home. Silk sheets, a feather bed, walls hung with tapestries depicting battles she didn't recognize. It felt wrong. A knock at the door. "Come in," she called. A young woman entered, dressed in the black leather of a royal guard. She had short auburn hair and sharp green eyes. "I'm Sarah," she said. "I've been assigned to train you." Lyra blinked. "Train me? You have power, but power without control is just chaos." Sarah crossed her arms. "The king wants you functional. That means weapons training, strategy, and learning how to use that magic without burning the fortress down." "I don't want to hurt anyone." "Then you'd better learn fast." Sarah smirked. "Because the people hunting you definitely want to hurt you." They spent the day in the training yard, a massive courtyard ringed by stone walls. Lyra was handed a sword. She'd never held one before, and told to swing. She nearly dropped it. "Pathetic," Sarah muttered. "Again." Lyra swung. The blade wobbled. "Again." Swing, wobble. Again. By noon, her arms were screaming. By evening, she could barely lift the sword, but she kept going, because every time she thought about quitting, she remembered the look on the hunter's face as he lunged for her. She remembered the fear in the villager's eyes. She couldn't go back to being weak. That night, she sat alone in the dining hall, picking at a meal she was too exhausted to eat. The hall was empty except for one figure seated at the far end. King Kael. He looked up. "Mind if I join you?" She shook her head. He sat across from her, bringing his own plate. For a moment, they ate in silence. "How was your first day?" he asked. "Humiliating." He smiled faintly. "Good. That means you're learning." "I don't know if I can do this," she admitted. "I'm not a warrior. I'm not whatever a sentinel is supposed to be." "Neither was your mother, probably," Kael said. "But she survived long enough to have you. That takes more than strength. It takes will." Lyra looked at him. "Why do you care? You're the king. You could just lock me up, use my power when you need it, and forget about me the rest of the time." "I could," he said, "but I won't." "Why not?" He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Because I've seen what happens when people with power stop caring about the ones without it. My father was a good king, but the nobles around him were vultures. By the time he died, half the kingdom was rotting from corruption. I inherited a throne built on lies." He met her eyes. "If you can help me tear those lies down, then maybe we can build something better." Lyra felt something shift inside her. Not hope, exactly, but something close to it. "I'll try," she said. "That's all I ask." Shakin. Weeks passed. Lyra trained every day. She learned to fight, to move, to think like a warrior. Sarah was merciless, pushing her harder than anyone ever had. But slowly, impossibly, Lyra began to improve. Her swings grew steadier, her footwork sharpened. She started to understand the rhythm of combat, the way bodies moved, the spaces between strikes, and the magic. The magic was harder. It came when she was angry, or afraid, or desperate. But when she tried to summon it deliberately, nothing happened. It was like trying to catch smoke. "Stop thinking," Sarah said one afternoon as they sparred in the yard. "You're trying to control it. You can't control something that's part of you. You just have to let it flow." "That doesn't make sense." "Then don't make sense. Just feel." Lyra closed her eyes. She thought of her mother, of the fire, of the pendant. The air around her began to hum. When she opened her eyes, silver light danced along her fingertips. Sarah grinned. "There it is?" But not everyone in Ironhold was happy about Lyra's presence. One evening, as she walked through the fortress library, she overheard voices behind a row of shelves. "She's a threat," a man said. The longer she stays, the more dangerous she becomes. The king trusts her, a woman replied. The king is a fool. The sentinels were wiped out for a reason. Their power is unnatural if she discovers what really happened. She won't. The records were destroyed centuries ago. Are you sure? Silence. Lyra held her breath. If she becomes a problem, the man said slowly, we'll deal with her. Quietly. Footsteps. They were leaving. Lyra pressed herself against the shelf, heart pounding. When the voices faded, she stepped out and looked around. No one. But she knew what she'd heard. Someone in the fortress wanted her dead, and they were willing to betray the king to do it. She went to Kael immediately. He was in his study, bent over a map covered in markers. He looked up when she entered. What's wrong? She told him everything. His expression darkened. Do you know who it was? No, I couldn't see them. He cursed under his breath. I suspected as much. There's a faction within the court, nobles who've grown rich off corruption. They know if you uncover their crimes, they'll lose everything. So what do we do? Kael stood and walked to the window. We find them, before they find you. How? He turned to her. By using what you are. If the sentinels could sense lies, then maybe you can too. Lyra's throat tightened. I don't know how. Then learn. His voice was firm, but not unkind. Because if we don't root them out, this whole kingdom will burn. That night, Lyra lay awake, staring at the ceiling. She thought about the pendant, about her mother, about the power she didn't ask for and couldn't escape. And she realized something. She wasn't just running from hunters anymore. She was hunting them back. The following morning, Kael summoned Lyra to the throne room before dawn. She arrived to find him standing beside a woman she'd never seen before. Tall, elegant, with silver hair swept into an intricate braid and eyes like chips of ice. She wore a gown of deep crimson, and rings glittered on every finger. There was something about her that made Lyra's skin crawl, though she couldn't name exactly what. Lyra, Kael said, his voice carefully neutral. This is Lady Valencrest. She oversees the kingdom's treasury and sits on my council. Lady Valencrest smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. So this is the girl everyone's whispering about. Lyra felt herself being measured, weighed, judged, and found wanting. I've heard remarkable things, Valencrest continued, stepping closer. A sentinel bloodline, awakened after 3 centuries. How unexpected. She circled Lyra slowly, like a predator assessing prey. Tell me, child, do you have any idea what your ancestors were capable of? No, my lady, Lyra said quietly. Perhaps that's for the best. Valencrest's smile sharpened. Ignorance can be a mercy. Kael cleared his throat. Lady Valencrest, I asked you here because I need your counsel on the northern tax reports. Of course, your majesty. Valencrest turned away from Lyra as if she'd already lost interest. Though I wonder if our guest should be present for such sensitive matters. She stays, Kael said firmly. Valencrest's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. As you wish. Kael gestured toward a table where several scrolls lay unfurled. Maps of the northern provinces marked with figures and annotations. These are reports from the past 3 years. Tax revenues have been cut nearly in half, but the governors claim there's been no decrease in production. Harvests are steady, trade is flowing, yet somehow the gold never reaches the treasury. Lyra stepped closer, studying the numbers. Even with her limited education, the discrepancies jumped out at her. Villages that should have been prosperous were listed as destitute. Mines that produced thousands of coins worth of ore every month were reporting losses. Someone is stealing, Lyra said. Obviously, Valencrest replied coolly. The question is who and how much. And how they're hiding it, Kael added. This kind of theft requires cooperation. Multiple people across multiple provinces, all working together, which means someone inside the court is coordinating it. Valencrest's expression remained perfectly calm. A disturbing thought, Your Majesty. But surely you don't suspect anyone on your own council? I suspect everyone, Kael said. That's why Lyra is here. Valencrest's gaze snapped to Lyra. I beg your pardon? The sentinels could sense deception, Kael explained. If Lyra's power has awakened, she may be able to identify the conspirators. For just a fraction of a second, something flickered across Valencrest's face. Fear? Anger? It was gone before Lyra could be sure. Your Majesty, Valencrest said smoothly. With all respect, perhaps this is too much responsibility for someone so inexperienced. She's been here, a few weeks? If she makes a mistake, accuses the wrong person, the consequences could be catastrophic. Then I'll take responsibility, Kael said. But we can't keep bleeding resources while nobles line their pockets. If Lyra can help us find the truth, we have to try. Valencrest's fingers curled around the edge of the table. The gesture was subtle, controlled, but Lyra noticed the whiteness of her knuckles. There was anger there, buried beneath layers of practiced composure. As you wish, Your Majesty, Valencrest said, bowing her head, though I hope for all our sakes that your faith in her is not misplaced. After Valencrest left, the heavy door closing behind her with a dull thud, Kael let out a long breath. Be very careful around that woman, he said. You think she's involved? I think she survived 3 kings by knowing exactly when to smile and when to strike. My grandfather trusted her. My father trusted her. And now she sits on my council, wealthy beyond measure, with connections throughout the kingdom. He rolled up the scrolls, his movements sharp with frustration. But we need proof, and right now you're the only one who can get it. Lyra looked down at the pendant hanging around her neck. It felt heavier than ever. What if I'm wrong? What if I accuse someone innocent? Then we'll deal with it, Kael said. But doing nothing isn't an option. Too many people are suffering while the corrupt grow fat on stolen gold. How do I even use this power? Lyra asked. I don't know how to control it. It just happens. Then we'll figure it out together. Kael met her eyes. You're not alone in this, Lyra. I won't let them destroy you the way they destroyed your ancestors. Something in his voice made her chest tighten. It wasn't just duty driving him. It was something deeper. Anger at the injustice. Grief for what had been lost. Determination to finally make things right. When do we start? She asked. This afternoon. I've called a council meeting. Every major noble will be there, including the ones most likely involved in the theft. He paused. All you have to do is listen. Watch. If your power responds to anything, I need to know. That afternoon, Lyra stood in front of the mirror in her chambers, trying to calm her racing heart. Sarah had helped her dress in a simple gown of deep blue, elegant enough to fit in with the court, plain enough not to draw too much attention. Her hair was pulled back from her face. The pendant hung visible at her throat, its silver surface catching the light. You look terrified, Sarah observed from the doorway. I am terrified. Good. Fear keeps you sharp. Sarah walked into the room and adjusted Lyra's collar. Just remember, these people are predators. They'll smell weakness and go for the throat. Don't give them anything. What if the pendant doesn't work? What if I stand there and feel nothing? Then you feel nothing. But something tells me that's not going to happen. Sarah squeezed her shoulder. You stopped 5 hunters with a thought, remember? You have power. You just need to trust it. Trust something I don't understand? Welcome to being a warrior, Sarah said with a grim smile. That's all any of us do. The council chamber was smaller than the throne room, but no less imposing. Circular, with high windows that let in sharp mountain light. A heavy oak table dominated the center, surrounded by chairs upholstered in leather. Tapestries depicting ancient battles hung on the walls, wolves tearing apart enemies, crowns dripping with blood. Lyra felt like she'd walked into a den of predators. 12 nobles sat around the table, each dressed in finery that probably cost more than Lyra's entire village earned in a year. They looked up as she entered behind Kael, their expressions ranging from curiosity to suspicion to open hostility. Your Majesty, one of them said, a thin man with a pointed beard. I wasn't aware we'd be entertaining guests today. Lyra is here at my request, Kael said, taking his seat at the head of the table. She's learning about court proceedings. How educational, the man replied dryly. Lyra stood behind Kael's chair, hands clasped in front of her, trying to make herself invisible. But she could feel every gaze on her, assessing, calculating. We'll begin with the northern reports, Kael said, his voice cutting through the murmurs. A stout man with a thick red beard and jowls that quivered when he spoke stood up. Lord Carrick, Lyra remembered from the briefing Kael had given her. He oversaw tax collection in the northern mining provinces. Your Majesty, I'm afraid the news is not encouraging, Carrick said. his voice thick with false sympathy. The northern provinces continue to struggle. Poor harvests, bandit raids, diseases among the livestock. The pendant grew warm against Lyra's skin. She drew in a sharp breath. It was subtle at first, just a gentle heat, like standing near a fire. But as Carrick continued speaking, the warmth intensified. And despite our best efforts, the tax revenues have declined. We've increased patrols, hired additional collectors, but the losses are simply too significant to overcome. The heat became a pulse, rhythmic, insistent. Lyra's vision flickered. For just a moment, she saw something else, an image overlaying reality like a ghostly reflection. Lord Carrick standing in a dark stone room lit by candles, counting stacks of gold coins, while a younger man with a ledger whispered numbers into his ear. The gold gleamed in the candlelight. Carrick's face wore an expression of greedy satisfaction, completely at odds with the concerned sympathy he was showing now. Then the vision vanished, and she was back in the council chamber, gasping softly. Cale's hand moved to the armrest of his chair, a subtle signal. He'd heard her reaction. "Thank you, Lord Carrick," Cale said smoothly. "We'll discuss solutions after we've heard all the reports." Carrick sat down, mopping his brow with a handkerchief. The meeting continued. Another noble stood, a thin woman with sharp features and calculating eyes. Lady Morell, who managed the eastern trade routes. "The eastern trade routes are secure, Your Majesty," she said in a clipped, precise voice. "No issues to report. All caravans have arrived on schedule, and merchants report no unusual difficulties." The pendant pulsed again, harder this time. Lyra's hands clenched. Another vision. Lady Morell sitting at a desk in a dim room, signing a document by candlelight. Her hand trembled as she wrote. Behind her, a shadowy figure loomed, too indistinct to make out clearly, but radiating menace. Morell looked terrified, her face pale and drawn. The vision faded. Lyra realized she was shaking. One by one, the nobles gave their reports. And one by one, the pendant reacted. Or didn't. Some speakers triggered nothing. Their words met with cool silence from the Silver Crescent. But others made it burn. By the time the meeting ended, Lyra had identified 5 nobles whose reports made the pendant pulse with heat. 5 people who were lying, stealing, or covering up crimes. When Kael finally dismissed the council, the nobles filed out slowly, casting glances at Lyra as they passed. Some looked curious, others looked hostile. Lord Carrick paused as he reached the door. "Your Majesty, if I may, is it wise to have an outsider present during such sensitive discussions?" "Lyra is not an outsider," Kael said coldly. "She's a guest of the crown." "Of course, Your Majesty. I meant no disrespect." But Carrick's eyes, when they landed on Lyra, were hard as stone. "I simply worry about information leaving this room." "Your concern is noted," Kael said. "You're dismissed." After the chamber finally emptied, Kael turned to Lyra. "What did you see?" She told him everything. The visions, the pendant's reactions, the 5 nobles who had triggered her power. His expression grew darker with each name. "2 of them I expected, Carrick and Morell. But the others," he rubbed his jaw. "This is worse than I thought." "Lady Morell looked afraid," Lyra said, "like someone was forcing her to lie. Which means she might be willing to talk if we can protect her." Kyle stood and paced the room, thinking. "We need to move carefully. If we accuse them all at once, the conspirators will realize we're onto them and destroy evidence. We need to draw them into the open." "How?" Kale stopped pacing and looked at her. "By making them desperate. Look." Over the next 3 days, Kyle began to quietly redistribute responsibilities within the court. Lord Carrick was relieved of his oversight of the northern provinces and given a minor ceremonial role overseeing the royal kennels instead, a humiliating demotion that made the message crystal clear. Lady Morell found herself suddenly replaced as trade minister, her duties handed to a younger noble with no connections to the old guard. The other 3 nobles whose names Lyra had given Kyle received similar treatment. Reduced responsibilities, sudden reassignments. Nothing overtly accusatory, but enough to send a clear signal. The king suspected something. The effect was immediate and electric. Lyra watched from the shadows as the court began to fracture. Whispers spread through the corridors like wildfire. Nobles who had been allies for decades suddenly viewed each other with suspicion. Private conversations happened behind closed doors. Servants reported seeing furtive meetings in unused wings of the fortress. And every day the pendant grew warmer against Lyra's skin, as if feeding on the anxiety permeating Ironhold's stone walls. On the third night, Sarah found Lyra in the training yard, practicing sword forms under the stars. "You're getting better," Sarah said, leaning against the wall with her arms crossed. Lyra lowered her blade, breathing hard. Sweat plastered her hair to her forehead despite the cold night air. "Doesn't feel like it. Trust me. A month ago, you swung that thing like you were trying to chop firewood with a butter knife. Now you actually look like you might be able to hurt someone." Sarah pushed off the wall and walked closer. "Your footwork's improved. You're keeping your guard up, and you're not telegraphing your strikes as much." Lyra managed a small smile. "High praise coming from you. Don't let it go to your head." But Sarah's expression turned serious. "People are talking about you, about what you're doing in those council meetings." "What are they saying?" "That you're a witch, that you've put some kind of spell on the king, that you're going to burn the whole fortress down and dance in the ashes." Sarah shrugged. "The usual nonsense people spout when they're scared of something they don't understand." "And what do you think?" Sarah studied her for a long moment, her green eyes sharp in the moonlight. "I think you're terrified, and I think you're trying really hard not to show it, but I also think you're a hell of a lot tougher than you look. You've got spine, Lyra. That's more than I can say for half the nobles in this place." Lyra's throat tightened. "I don't feel tough. I feel like I'm drowning, and everyone expects me to swim." "Welcome to the club," Sarah said. "That's what it feels like to be a warrior. None of us feel ready. None of us feel strong enough. But we show up anyway and do what needs to be done. That's the only thing that separates us from the people who run and hide." "What if I fail?" "Then you fail. And then you get up and try again." Sarah clapped her on the shoulder. "But between you and me, I don't think you're going to fail. You've got something most people don't, a reason to fight. You've seen what these bastards have done, what they're willing to do. That kind of anger, properly channeled, makes you dangerous." Lyra thought about Greyhaven, about the hunters who had attacked her village, about the fear in little Bess's mother's eyes when the soldiers arrived. "You're right," she said quietly. "I am angry." "Good. Use it. Yet." The next morning, a messenger arrived at Lyra's chambers just after dawn. "His Majesty requests your presence in the library," the young man said, bowing. "He says it's urgent." Lyra dressed quickly and made her way through Ironhold's labyrinthine corridors. The library was in the western tower, a vast circular room lined floor to ceiling with books and scrolls. Morning light streamed through tall windows, illuminating dust motes that drifted through the air like tiny stars. She found Cale standing before a massive shelf of ancient tomes, his back to her, shoulders tense. "You wanted to see me?" she asked. He turned. His face was drawn, as if he hadn't slept. "I've been searching through the old records, trying to find anything about the Sentinels, how they were hunted, why they were really feared, what made them such a threat that an entire bloodline had to be exterminated. And most of it was destroyed during the Purge, deliberately. Someone wanted to make sure the truth stayed buried." He pulled down a leather-bound journal, its pages yellowed and brittle with age. "But I found this hidden behind a false panel. It belonged to a scholar named Matthias Corvin, who lived 300 years ago during the height of the Sentinel hunts." Lyra stepped closer, her heart pounding. "What does it say?" Kyle opened the journal carefully, as if the pages might crumble at his touch. His finger traced lines of cramped, faded handwriting. That the Sentinels didn't just sense lies. They could see the source of power itself, where it came from, how it flowed through institutions and hierarchies, who truly controlled it and who was just a puppet. That ability terrified the kings because, he paused, his jaw tightening, because the royal bloodline's claim to the throne wasn't divine. It was stolen. Lyra's blood went cold. "What?" "The first king, Aldrich the Conqueror, the one every child learns about in history lessons, he didn't inherit the crown through noble lineage or divine right. He took it. Through treachery, through murder. He assassinated the rightful ruler during a peace negotiation and then slaughtered anyone who might challenge his claim." Cale's voice was flat, emotionless, but his hands trembled slightly as he held the journal. "The Sentinels knew. They could prove it. Their power would have exposed the lie that the entire kingdom was built on. So they killed them all, Lyra whispered, to protect the secret. Yes, every sentinel was hunted down and executed. Men, women, children, it didn't matter. The purge lasted 10 years. By the end, the bloodline was believed extinct. He closed the journal carefully. That's what Lady Valencrest and her faction are protecting. Not the kingdom, not the people, not even the current king, just the lie. The foundational myth that gives the crown its legitimacy. Lyra sank into a chair, her mind reeling. But you already know the truth. Why do you need me? Because I can't prove it. This journal would be dismissed as the ravings of a long-dead madman. And even if I could prove it, half the court would call it treason. They'd rather execute me than admit the truth. He looked at her, his storm-gray eyes intense. But if a sentinel stood before the kingdom and spoke the truth, if your power confirmed it, made it impossible to deny, no one could ignore it. You want me to tear down the entire system. I want you to help me rebuild it into something honest, something that serves the people instead of feeding on them. He set the journal down and moved closer to her. I know what I'm asking, Lyra. I know the risk. But I can't do this alone. Before she could respond, the library door burst open with a crash that made them both jump. Sarah stood in the doorway, her face flushed, breathing hard as if she'd run the entire way. We have a problem, she gasped. Duh. They followed her down the spiral stairs of the western tower, through corridors already filling with morning traffic, to the east tower courtyard. A crowd had gathered there, pressing against the guards who were trying to push them back. Kael's expression darkened. What happened? See for yourself, Sarah said grimly. The guards parted to let them through. On the ground, crumpled in a spreading pool of blood, lay Lord Carrick. Lyra's stomach turned violently. She'd seen death before. Illness, accidents, the natural end that came for everyone eventually. But this was different. This was brutal. Carrick's throat had been cut with such force that his head was nearly severed. His eyes stared sightlessly at the dawn sky, and pinned to his chest with a dagger was a piece of parchment, already stained red. Kyle knelt and pulled the parchment free with careful fingers. His face went pale as he read. What does it say? Sarah asked quietly. He handed it to her without a word. Sarah read aloud, her voice cutting through the murmur of the crowd. Traitors will be silenced. A ripple of shock ran through the onlookers. Lyra felt dozens of eyes turning toward her, weighing her, judging her. They're cleaning house, Kael said quietly, standing, killing anyone who might talk under pressure. Then Lady Mirelle is next, Lyra said, finding her voice despite the horror churning in her stomach. Kael's jaw tightened. Sarah, find her, now. I want her in my private chambers under guard within the hour. Sarah nodded and sprinted away, calling orders to the guards as she went. Kael turned to address the crowd, his voice ringing with authority. Everyone return to your duties. The Royal Guard will investigate this crime. Anyone with information is to report to Captain Thorne immediately. Slowly, reluctantly, the crowd began to disperse. But Lyra saw the looks they cast her way. The suspicion, the fear, the barely concealed hostility. One man, a servant judging by his plain clothes, spat on the ground as he passed her. Which, he muttered. Kael noticed. His hand went to his sword hilt. You have something to say. The man paled and hurried away without answering. Ignore them, Kael said to Lyra. They think I did this. Let them think what they want. We need to focus on keeping Mirelle alive long enough to get answers. But as they turned to leave, Lyra caught sight of something that made her freeze, carved into the stone wall beside Carrick's body, barely visible in the morning shadows, was a symbol, a crescent moon wrapped in thorns. The mark of the sentinels. Someone was framing her. An hour passed, then 2. Sarah didn't return. Kael paced his study like a caged wolf, fury barely contained beneath his rigid control. Lyra sat by the window, watching the sun climb higher, her stomach a knot of anxiety. Finally, the door opened. Sarah entered, her face grim as death. She's gone. Kael stopped pacing. Gone? Her chambers are empty. No sign of a struggle. The bed's made, clothes still in the wardrobe, but she's nowhere in the fortress. It's like she just vanished into thin air. Cale slammed his fist on the desk hard enough to make the inkwell jump. Damn it! There's more, Sarah continued. She held up a small glass vial, empty and stained. I found this hidden in her room, tucked behind a loose stone in the fireplace. It's poison, very rare, very expensive, the same kind that was used to kill the old king. The room went deathly silent. Lyra's heart sank like a stone. Your father? Kyle took the vial from Sarah with shaking hands. His face had gone completely blank, all emotion locked down behind an iron mask. I always suspected, but there was never proof. My father was healthy one day, dead the next. The physician said it was his heart, that he'd been under too much stress. But I knew someone had killed him. So Valencrest had your father murdered, Lyra said, the pieces falling into place with horrible clarity. And now she's killing everyone who might expose her. Which means, Sarah said, meeting Lyra's eyes, you're next on the list. Well, that night, sleep was impossible. Lyra paced her chambers like a ghost, unable to shake the image of Carrick's dead eyes or the symbol carved into the wall. Her symbol. Someone was trying to turn the court against her, to make her look like the murderer. And it was working. She'd heard the whispers in the corridors, seen the way people shrank back when she passed. Finally, unable to stand the confines of her room any longer, she left and wandered the fortress. Her feet carried her without conscious thought through empty hallways and down cold stairs until she found herself in the chapel. It was a small stone room, simple and austere, with a single stained glass window depicting a wolf and a crown. She'd never been particularly religious. Her mother had taught her to trust in herbs and common sense, not divine intervention. But there was something comforting about the silence here. She sat on a wooden bench and closed her eyes, trying to calm her racing thoughts. Couldn't sleep either? She jumped, her heart slamming against her ribs. Kyle stepped out of the shadows near the altar, still dressed, looking as exhausted as she felt. You scared me, she said, one hand pressed to her chest. Sorry. I didn't mean to. He sat beside her on the bench, close enough that she could feel warmth radiating from him. I come here sometimes, when the weight gets too heavy and I need a place where no one expects me to have all the answers. They sat in silence for a moment. Outside, wind rattled the windows. Do you regret it? Lyra asked quietly. Bringing me here? No. Even though people are dying because of me. People were dying long before you arrived, Kyle said, his voice hard. They just died quietly, in villages far from court, where no one with power had to see or care. Farmers starving because their taxes were too high. Miners dying in collapsed shafts because safety wasn't profitable. Children going without medicine because corrupt officials stole the funds meant for healers. He turned to look at her. At least now we're fighting back. At least now there's a chance to stop it. I don't know if I'm strong enough for this. Strength isn't about never being afraid, Kyle said. It's about doing what needs to be done even when every instinct is screaming at you to run. That's courage, Lyra, and you have more of it than you know. She met his gaze. In the dim candlelight, she could see past the crown, past the authority, past the armor he wore every day. She saw a man who was tired, scared, carrying a burden too heavy for one person. A man who was trusting her, a village healer he'd known for only weeks, to help him reshape a kingdom. I won't let you down, she said. I know you won't. His hand moved, hesitated, then settled over hers where it rested on the bench between them. We're in this together now, for better or worse. His touch sent warmth racing up her arm. She realized suddenly how close they were sitting, close enough to see the flecks of silver in his gray eyes, close enough to feel his breath. The moment stretched, fragile and charged with something unnamed. Then Kyle cleared his throat and stood, breaking the spell. It's late. You should try to get some rest. Tomorrow's going to be difficult. Why? What happens tomorrow? I'm announcing a formal banquet in honor of the Northern Lords, he said, and everyone, including Lady Valencrest, will be required to attend. It's a trap, Sarah said flatly when she heard the plan the next morning. You're gathering all the conspirators in one place, making them feel cornered. If Valencrest wants to make a move against you, or against Lyra, this is exactly when she'll do it. They were in Kyle's study, the three of them standing around his desk, where a map of the banquet hall lay marked with positions. Exactly, Kael said. We need to force her hand. As long as she's operating in shadows, she's untouchable. But if we can make her reveal herself publicly, we'll have the proof we need. Lyra stood at the edge of the room, listening. And what happens when she does? You'll be there, Kael said, pointing to a spot on the map. Hidden in the alcove behind the eastern tapestry. You'll be able to see and hear everything. If she reveals herself, if she tries anything, your power will confirm it, and we'll have witnesses. Sarah crossed her arms. This is insane. You're using yourself as bait and gambling that Valencrest will be stupid enough to take it. She's not stupid, Kael said, but she's desperate. And desperate people make mistakes. And if she doesn't make a mistake, if she just poisons the wine and walks away clean, then we'll deal with it. Kael's voice was iron. But I won't keep fighting shadows forever. We end this. Tomorrow night. The day of the banquet crawled by with agonizing slowness. Lyra trained with Sarah in the morning, pushing her body until her muscles screamed, trying to burn off the anxiety. In the afternoon, she forced herself to eat despite having no appetite. By evening, her nerves were wound so tight she felt like she might shatter. Sarah helped her dress in a simple dark gown that would blend into the shadows. Remember, Sarah said as she fastened the clasps, you're just observing. Don't interfere unless absolutely necessary. Let Kael handle the politics. What if something goes wrong? Then you do what you've been training for. You fight. Sarah met her eyes in the mirror, and you win. The banquet hall was a cathedral of excess and power. Golden chandeliers hung from the vaulted ceiling like captured suns, casting warm light over tables laden with roasted meats, fresh bread, wheels of cheese, bowls of fruit, and bottles of wine from every corner of the kingdom. Nobles dressed in silk and velvet filled the room, laughing and talking as if there wasn't blood on the stones outside, as if people weren't dying. Lyra watched from her hiding place behind the tapestry, her heart pounding so hard she was sure everyone could hear it. Kael sat at the head table, flanked by Lady Valencrest and several other council members. He looked calm, confident, every inch the king, but Lyra could see the tension in his shoulders, the way his hand rested near his knife. The feast began. Servants moved between tables like dancers, pouring wine and clearing plates. Musicians played softly in the corner, gentle, civilized music that felt obscene given what was at stake. Everything seemed normal, too normal. Lyra's pendant began to warm against her skin. She focused on Valencrest. The woman was smiling, sipping her wine, chatting with the noble beside her. She looked completely at ease, as if she hadn't orchestrated murders and theft on a massive scale. But the pendant was pulsing now, a steady rhythm that matched Lyra's heartbeat. Something was wrong. Lyra scanned the room looking for the threat. Servants, guards, nobles. Everything looked... Wait. There. A servant standing behind Valencrest's chair, young, nondescript, holding a wine pitcher. Nothing unusual about him, except the pendant was burning now, hot enough to hurt. Lyra watched as Valencrest leaned back slightly and whispered something without turning her head. The servant nodded, almost imperceptibly. Then, as he moved to refill Kael's cup, his hand dipped into his sleeve. Lyra saw it in a vision overlaying reality, the servant's fingers closing around a small vial. Poison. The same kind that killed Kael's father. She didn't think, didn't hesitate. She burst from behind the tapestry, shoving it aside. Stop! The hall fell silent, as if someone had cut all sound with a blade. Every eye turned to her. Kael stood. Lyra, the wine, she gasped, pointing at the servant. He's poisoning you, right now. Valencrest's smile vanished like frost in sunlight. What a ridiculous accusation. Check him, Lyra said, her voice stronger now, fueled by the pendant's burning certainty. The servant behind Lady Valencrest. He has a vial. Kael gestured sharply. Guards moved immediately, converging on the servant. The young man tried to run, but they caught him before he'd taken 3 steps. They pulled a small glass vial from his sleeve. The hall erupted in chaos. Nobles jumped to their feet. Shouts filled the air. Guards drew weapons. Valencrest rose slowly, her face a mask of fury barely contained. This is absurd. That boy is clearly disturbed. I have nothing to do with... Then you won't mind, Kael said coldly, his voice cutting through the noise like a sword, if we test the wine. He gestured to a guard, who brought over Valencrest's cup, the one she'd been drinking from all evening. Kale pulled a silver spoon from the table and dipped it into the liquid. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the silver began to tarnish, turning black as ink. Poison. The hall went deathly silent. Valencrest's carefully controlled expression cracked. For just a fraction of a second, Lyra saw naked panic flash across her face. Then she bolted. She moved faster than anyone expected, shoving the noble beside her into the guard's path and sprinting toward the side exit. Nobles scrambled out of her way. Chairs crashed to the floor. Lyra didn't think. She just ran. She caught up to Valencrest in the corridor outside the hall, her legs pumping, adrenaline drowning out exhaustion. The woman spun, and suddenly there was a dagger in her hand, pulled from somewhere in her gown. "Stay back, girl," Valencrest hissed, her composure completely shattered now. Gone was the elegant lady. In her place stood something desperate and dangerous. Lyra raised her hands. The pendant flared with brilliant silver light, casting harsh shadows on the stone walls. "You killed the old king," Lyra said, her voice shaking but clear. "You've been stealing from the provinces for years. And you murdered your own allies, Carrick, probably Morel too, to keep them quiet." "They were weak," Valencrest spat, her face contorting with rage. "They would have broken under pressure, ruined everything we built." "Why? Why do all this?" Valencrest laughed, a bitter, broken sound. "Because this kingdom was built on the backs of people like me. We did the work. We made the hard choices. We kept the realm running while kings sat on stolen thrones and pretended to be chosen by heaven." Her eyes blazed. "The Sentinels knew the truth, that the crown was nothing but a lie, that the royal bloodline had no more right to rule than any peasant, so we destroyed them, hunted every last one to extinction, and kept that secret buried for 300 years. And you'll kill anyone who threatens to expose it." "Yes." Valencrest's grip tightened on the dagger. "Even you!" She lunged. Time seemed to slow. Lyra saw the blade coming, saw the murder in Valencrest's eyes, saw her own death rushing toward her. The pendant exploded with silver light. The blast caught Valencrest mid-stride like an invisible wall, lifting her off her feet and slamming her into the stone wall with bone-cracking force. The dagger clattered to the floor, skittering across the stones. Valencrest crumpled, gasping, her silver hair disheveled and blood trickling from her nose. Guards poured into the corridor, weapons drawn, surrounding them. Kale arrived a moment later, breathing hard, his eyes moving from Valencrest to Lyra. "Are you hurt?" Lyra shook her head, her whole body trembling with aftermath. Kale turned to the guards. "Arrest her. And I want everyone she's been in contact with identified and brought in for questioning. I want names, records, proof of every crime." As the guards hauled Valencrest to her feet, she looked back at Lyra. Despite the blood and the defeat, her eyes still burned with defiance. "You think you've won?" she said, her voice hoarse. "You think exposing me changes anything? You've just started a war, girl. The nobles whose corruption you'll uncover, the families whose wealth depends on those stolen funds. They'll tear this kingdom apart before they let you destroy their power." "Then let them try," Kael said coldly. "Take her away." As the guards dragged Valencrest off, her words echoing in the stone corridor, Lyra felt the pendant's heat finally begin to fade. But the dread in her stomach only grew stronger, because she knew Valencrest was right. This wasn't the end, it was just the beginning. The fortress erupted into chaos before dawn. Lyra woke to shouting in the corridors, the thunder of boots on stone, the clash of steel. She threw on her clothes and rushed to the door, heart hammering. Sarah burst in without knocking, her face grim. "Get dressed. Proper armor this time. We're under attack." "What? Who?" "Valencrest's allies. They broke her out during the night shift change, killed 3 guards doing it." Sarah tossed Lyra a leather cuirass. Turns out she wasn't bluffing about that war. Lyra's hands shook as she buckled the armor. "Where's Kael?" "Throne room, coordinating the defense. Half the noble houses have declared for Valencrest. They're calling it a coup, saying Kael's been bewitched by a sentinel witch and is unfit to rule." Sarah's jaw tightened. "They've got maybe 200 armed men inside the fortress walls, more outside, cutting off the supply roads." 200? How did they get— "They were already here, Guards, servants, soldiers, people we trusted. Sarah handed Lyra a sword. Turns out Valencrest spent decades building her network, and now it's coming for us. They ran through corridors transformed into battlefields. Bodies lay crumpled in doorways, some wearing the king's colors, others in the livery of noble houses. Blood painted the stone floors. Smoke drifted through the halls from fires burning somewhere deeper in the fortress. The throne room had become a command center. Kael stood over a table covered in maps, shouting orders to captains and runners. His armor was already stained with blood. When he saw Lyra, relief flashed across his face. "Thank the gods! I was about to send someone to get you." He gestured to the maps. Valencrest's forces control the East Wing and the Outer Bailey. They're trying to cut us off from the armory and the food stores. "How many men do we have?" Lyra asked. "Maybe 100 loyal soldiers, another 50 servants and guards we can arm." His expression was bleak. "Against 200 trained fighters? We can hold for a while, but not forever. What about reinforcements, the garrison towns? 3 days away at best. Valencrest's people blocked the messenger ravens last night, killed every bird in the rookery." He slammed his fist on the table. "We're cut off." A captain ran up, breathing hard. "Your Majesty, they've breached the inner courtyard. We're falling back to the Great Hall." Kael cursed. "How long can we hold there?" "A day? Maybe 2 if we ration water. But, Your Majesty..." The captain hesitated. "The men are saying the girl brought this down on us, that the Sentinel curse is real. Some are talking about handing her over." The temperature in the room seemed to drop. Kael's voice went cold as winter stone. "Anyone who suggests that again will hang. Is that clear?" "Yes, Your Majesty." After the captain left, Sarah moved closer. "He's not wrong about the mood. People are scared, and scared people look for someone to blame." "Then we give them someone else to blame," Kael said. "Valencrest and the nobles who betrayed their oaths. This is their doing, not Lyra's." "Logic doesn't calm mobs," Sarah said quietly. Before Kael could respond, an explosion shook the fortress. Dust rained from the ceiling. Shouts and screams echoed from somewhere below. "They're using black powder," Kael said, his face pale. "Trying to blow through the lower gates." Another explosion, closer this time. "We need to move," Sarah said. "Now." They retreated to the Great Hall, a massive stone chamber with walls thick enough to withstand siege weapons. Kael's remaining forces barricaded the doors with furniture and rubble. Wounded soldiers lay against the walls, being tended by servants with trembling hands. Lyra helped where she could, binding wounds, offering water, trying to ignore the pain and fear etched into every face. These people were dying because of her, because she'd uncovered secrets that should have stayed buried. "Don't," a voice said behind her. She turned. Kael stood there, covered in stone dust and blood. None of it his own, she hoped. "Don't what?" "Blame yourself. I can see it in your eyes." He sat heavily on a wooden crate, exhaustion written in every line of his body. This was always coming. Valencrest and her faction have been poisoning this kingdom for decades. You just finally forced them into the open. People are dying. People were always dying. They just died slowly, where we didn't have to watch. He looked at the wounded soldiers. At least now we're fighting for something that matters. Lyra sat beside him. Outside the barricaded doors, she could hear footsteps, voices, the scrape of weapons. The enemy was gathering. "What happens if they break through?" she asked quietly. "Then we fight until we can't anymore." His voice was matter-of-fact, as if he were discussing the weather. "And if we lose, they'll execute me for treason and probably burn you as a witch." "That's a cheerful thought." He managed a ghost of a smile. "I've never been good at comforting lies." Sarah approached, wiping blood from her sword. "We've got maybe an hour before they try the doors. They're building a ram out there." "Let them come," Kael said, standing. "We'll make them pay for every inch." But Lyra's mind was racing. There had to be another way. Some option they hadn't considered. The pendant was warm against her skin, pulsing gently, almost like it was trying to tell her something. She closed her eyes, focusing on that warmth, on the power sleeping inside her that she'd barely begun to understand. And suddenly, she knew. "The archives," she said, opening her eyes. Kael frowned. "What?" The archives in the lower levels, where you found that journal about the Sentinels. Her words came faster now, urgency building. If there's one record that survived, there might be others. Something that could help us. Help us how? What are we looking for? I don't know. But the pendant is reacting. It's trying to show me something. She stood, decision crystallizing. I need to go there, now. The lower levels are probably already in enemy hands, Sarah said. Then I'll have to be careful. Kael grabbed her arm. Absolutely not. It's suicide. Staying here is suicide, Lyra shot back. You said it yourself. We can hold for maybe 2 days, then what? We die fighting or we surrender and die anyway. Unless we find something that changes the equation. And you think ancient records will help us against 200 armed men? I think the Sentinels were exterminated for a reason. And whatever that reason was, it's down there in those archives. She met his eyes. Trust me. Please. Kael was silent for a long moment, jaw working. Then he turned to Sarah. Go with her. Take 5 of our best fighters. Your Majesty, you need every sword here. I need Lyra alive more. If she's right, if there's something down there that can turn this around, it's worth the risk. He looked at Lyra. But if it goes wrong, you run. You get out of this fortress, and you don't look back, understood? I'm not leaving you. That's not a request. It's an order. His hand moved to her face, cupping her cheek. The gesture was so unexpected, so tender, that her breath caught. You're more important than any of us. If the Sentinel bloodline dies here, we lose any chance of ever fixing this broken kingdom. So you survive, no matter what. Before she could respond, he leaned forward and pressed his lips to her forehead, a brief, fierce kiss that felt like a promise and a goodbye. Then he stepped back, his expression hardening into the mask of a king. Go, and be careful. The lower levels of Ironhold were a maze of corridors carved directly into the mountain, cold, dark. The torches set in iron sconces cast dancing shadows that made every corner look like it held an enemy. Sarah led the way, moving silent as smoke. Behind her came 5 soldiers, the best fighters Kael could spare. And behind them, Lyra, heart pounding so hard she was sure the sound would give them away. They encountered the first patrol near the old wine cellar. 3 men in the livery of House Carrick, the dead lord's family soldiers, out for revenge. They died quickly, throats cut before they could raise an alarm. Sarah and her team moved with brutal efficiency, leaving the bodies hidden behind empty barrels. Not much farther, Sarah whispered as they descended another staircase, this one slick with moisture. The archives are 2 levels down. But when they reached the archive entrance, they found it wasn't unguarded. A dozen men stood before the heavy oak door, armed with swords and crossbows. And standing at their center was a figure Lyra recognized, Lady Morell, the Eastern trade minister who'd vanished from her chambers. She was alive, and very clearly on Valencrest's side. Sarah, Morell said, her voice cold. I should have known Kael would send his pet killer, and the Sentinel girl too. How convenient. Sarah's hand tightened on her sword hilt. We don't want to fight, Morell. Just let us pass. I don't think so. Morell gestured, and the crossbowmen raised their weapons. Lady Valencrest wants the girl alive, but she'll settle for dead if necessary. And you, Sarah? You're just a traitor who'll hang either way. Why are you doing this? Lyra asked, finding her voice. I saw your vision in the council chamber. You were afraid. Someone was forcing you. I made a choice, Morell interrupted, just like you did. The difference is, I chose the winning side. This isn't about winning, Lyra said. It's about what's right. Morell laughed bitterly. Right? You want to know what's right? Right is survival. Right is protecting your family when powerful people threaten them. Right is doing whatever it takes to make sure you don't end up like poor Carrick, bleeding out in a courtyard. Her expression hardened. I'm done being afraid. Valencrest offers security. Kael offers only noble speeches and a quick death. She's using you, Lyra said, just like she used Carrick. And when she doesn't need you anymore. Enough talking. Morell raised her hand. Take them. The crossbows fired. Sarah moved like lightning, shoving Lyra behind a pillar as bolts hissed past. The 5 soldiers charged forward, weapons drawn. The corridor erupted into violence. Steel rang against steel. Men screamed. Blood sprayed across the ancient stone walls. Sarah fought like a demon, her blade a silver blur cutting through enemies. But they were outnumbered 2-1. One of Kael's soldiers went down, a crossbow bolt through his throat. Then another, gutted by Morel's sword. The trade minister fought with surprising skill. Lyra pressed herself against the pillar, heart racing. The pendant was burning against her skin, hot enough to hurt. Power built inside her, demanding release. She'd used it 3 times now, to stop the hunters in Greyhaven, to identify the poison at the banquet, to blast Valencrest into the wall. Each time it had come from emotion, fear, determination, anger. What if she could control it? What if she could direct it instead of just letting it explode? Another of Kael's soldiers fell, choking on his own blood. Lyra stepped out from behind the pillar. She raised her hands and let the power flow. Silver light erupted from the pendant, but this time she shaped it, focused it. Instead of an explosion, it became a wave that rolled down the corridor like a tidal surge. It caught Morel's soldiers and lifted them off their feet, slamming them into walls with bone-breaking force. The crossbowmen went flying. Even Morel was thrown backward, crashing into the archive door. The light faded. The corridor went silent, except for groaning. Sarah stared at Lyra, eyes wide. "How did you—" "I don't know," Lyra gasped, her legs suddenly weak. The pendant was cooling rapidly, leaving a dull ache in her chest. "I just did." 2 of their 5 soldiers were still standing, bleeding, but alive. The rest were dead. Sarah moved to the archive door and tried the handle. Locked. She looked at Lyra. "Can you do that again? Blow it open?" "I don't think so. I'm exhausted." One of the surviving soldiers moved to Morel, who lay crumpled against the wall, breathing shallowly. "She's still alive, Captain." "Leave her," Sarah said. "We don't have time." The soldier produced a set of lockpicks and went to work on the door. After several tense minutes, the lock clicked open. The archives beyond were vast, rows upon rows of shelves stretching into darkness, laden with scrolls, books, and documents centuries old. The air smelled of dust and decay. "Spread out," Sarah ordered. "Look for anything about the sentinels. Move fast. That blast was loud. Someone's going to come investigate." They scattered through the shelves, searching by torchlight. Lyra let the pendant guide her, following its warmth like a compass. It pulled her deeper into the archives, past shelves of tax records and trade agreements, past military reports and noble genealogies, until she reached a section at the very back where the dust lay thick as snow. There, on a shelf marked with a symbol she didn't recognize, sat a wooden box bound with iron chains. The pendant burned hot again. This was it. "Sarah!" she called. "I found something!" Sarah appeared beside her, torch held high. "What is it?" "I don't know, but the pendant is reacting." The soldier with the lock picks moved forward and examined the chains. "These are old, really old, but I think I can—" The picks clicked. The chains fell away. Lyra opened the box with trembling hands. Inside lay a single book bound in black leather, its cover marked with the crescent and thorns symbol of the Sentinels. And beneath the symbol, words in a language Lyra had never seen but somehow understood. The true history of the broken crown. She lifted the book carefully. As her fingers touched the leather, the pendant flared with light, and images flooded her mind. A king standing over a murdered body, blood on his hands. Sentinels being dragged to pyres, their screams echoing. A young woman with Lyra's eyes and her mother's face, speaking truth to power and dying for it. And something else, something deeper. A power sleeping beneath Ironhold itself, locked away centuries ago, waiting. Lyra gasped and nearly dropped the book. "What did you see?" Sarah demanded. "The truth." Lyra clutched the book to her chest. "And something more. Something they buried along with the Sentinels." She met Sarah's eyes. "There's a chamber beneath this fortress, a place where the old Sentinels kept their power. If I can reach it, Lyra." Sarah's voice was grim. "Look at this." She pointed to an inscription on the inside of the box lid, written in common tongue. "The Sentinel's heart lies in the mountain's womb. Only blood of the line may enter. All others who try will die." "A test," one of the soldiers said, "to keep outsiders away. Or a warning," Sarah said, "that whatever's down there is dangerous." Lyra's mind raced. A chamber beneath the fortress. Power locked away. the pendant reacting stronger than it ever had. This was what Valencrest had been so desperate to hide. Not just the truth about the stolen crown, but the fact that the Sentinel's power hadn't died with them. It had been sealed away, waiting for a survivor to reclaim it. "How do we find this chamber?" Sarah asked. Lyra flipped through the book, her hands shaking with urgency. The pages were filled with diagrams, instructions, warnings, and there, near the end, a map. It showed a secret passage leading down from the archives, through the mountain's heart, to a chamber marked with the sentinel symbol. "Here," Lyra said, pointing. "The entrance should be—" Behind them, footsteps thundered in the corridor, shouts, the clash of weapons. "They found us," Sarah said. "We need to go. Now." "The passage entrance is through there," Lyra pointed to the back wall of the archives. "Behind the shelves." They ran. Behind them, enemy soldiers poured into the archives. Crossbow bolts hissed through the air. One caught a soldier in the back and he went down without a sound. Sarah and the remaining soldier helped Lyra shove aside a massive bookshelf. Behind it, hidden in shadow, was a narrow doorway carved into the stone. "Go!" Sarah shouted, turning to face the pursuers. "I'll hold them." "Sarah, no. That's an order, girl. Get down there and find whatever power you're looking for. End this fight." Sarah's face was hard, determined. "And tell Kyle I'm sorry I won't be there to see his kingdom rebuilt." She charged back into the archives, her war cry echoing off the stones. The last soldier grabbed Lyra's arm and dragged her through the doorway. They slammed it shut behind them and threw the iron bar into place just as bodies crashed against the other side. "Move!" the soldier gasped. They ran down stone stairs carved directly into the mountain, descending into darkness lit only by the silver glow of Lyra's pendant. The passage seemed to go on forever, spiraling deeper and deeper. The air grew cold. The walls wept moisture. Lyra's lungs burned and her legs screamed, but she kept running because stopping meant death. Finally, the stairs ended at another door. This one was different. It was made of silver, covered in sentinel symbols that seemed to shift and writhe in the pendant's light. And at its center, a handprint carved into the metal. Lyra placed her hand against it. The pendant exploded with light so bright she had to close her eyes. Power surged through her, along her arm, into the door. Ancient mechanisms groaned and clicked. The door swung open. Beyond lay a chamber that took her breath away. Circular, vast, its walls carved with intricate designs that glowed with soft silver light. And at its center, floating in the air above a stone pedestal, hung a sphere of pure light, pulsing, alive, ancient beyond measure. The sentinel's heart. Lyra stepped forward, transfixed. The soldier stayed at the entrance, staring in awe. "What is it?" he whispered. "The source," Lyra breathed. "The power the sentinels drew from, the thing they died to protect." She moved closer. The sphere pulsed in rhythm with her pendant, as if recognizing her. This was it. The weapon that could end the siege, the power that could save Kyle and everyone still fighting above. All she had to do was take it. But as her hand reached toward the light, she heard a voice, not with her ears, but inside her mind. To claim this power is to accept its burden, to see all truths, even those that will destroy what you love, to judge without mercy, even when mercy is what you desire, to become what your ancestors were, witness, weapon, and curse. Will you pay the price? Lyra's hand trembled. Everything she'd been through flashed through her mind. Greyhaven, the hunters, Kale, Sarah, the bodies in the corridors above, the kingdom bleeding itself to death on lies and corruption. She thought of her mother burning in a fire meant to hide her identity, of all the sentinels who'd died 300 years ago, executed for speaking truth to power. And she thought of Kyle's words, "You're more important than any of us." Was she willing to become what the sentinels had been? To carry that burden? To judge kings and tear down kingdoms? Behind her, the door exploded inward. The soldier who'd come with her flew backward, slamming into the wall with a sickening crack. He didn't move again. And through the shattered doorway stepped Lady Valencrest, flanked by armed soldiers. Her face was bruised from when Lyra had blasted her into the wall, but her eyes burned with triumph. "So this is where you've been hiding it," Valencrest said, staring at the sphere of light. "The source of sentinel power. The reason my ancestors spent a decade hunting yours to extinction. She smiled coldly. And now you're going to give it to me. Never, Lyra said. You don't have a choice, girl. Valincrest gestured, and her soldiers raised crossbows. Step away from the heart, or I'll put a bolt through your skull. Lyra looked at the sphere, at Valincrest, at the crossbows aimed at her heart. The voice spoke again in her mind. Choose. I warned you what would happen if you came after my people, Lyra said quietly. She reached out and grabbed the sentinel's heart. Power exploded through her like lightning, like fire, like the birth of stars. It roared through her veins, her bones, her soul. The pendant shattered, its pieces dissolving into silver light that merged with the sphere. Lyra screamed. The world turned white. When her vision cleared, she was no longer just Lyra Thornwell, village healer from Greyhaven. She was the last sentinel, and she could see everything, the threads of power running through the fortress above. Every lie, every corruption, every hidden truth laid bare. She saw Valincrest's crimes stretching back decades, murders, thefts, betrayals. She saw the other nobles, their secrets exposed like wounds, and she saw something else, something that made her blood run cold. Kael, standing in the great hall above, surrounded by enemies, bleeding from a dozen wounds, fighting with everything he had left. He was about to die. No, Lyra whispered. The power surged at her command. She raised her hand and reality bent. The chamber, the mountain, the fortress, all of it was connected now. She could feel it, control it. Valincrest stared at her in horror. What have you... Lyra didn't let her finish. Silver light erupted from her outstretched hand and slammed into Valincrest and her soldiers, pinning them against the walls of the chamber. They struggled, but couldn't move, held by power beyond anything they'd ever imagined. You wanted to know what sentinels could do? Lyra said, and her voice echoed with something ancient and terrible. Now you'll see. She turned and ran back up the passage, power flowing through her, lighting her way. The stairs that had taken minutes to descend took seconds to ascend. She burst back into the archives where bodies lay scattered. Sarah was among them, bleeding but alive, propped against a shelf. Lyra? She gasped. You look different. Stay here, Lyra said. I'm ending this. She didn't wait for a response. She ran through the corridors, following the threads of power to where Kael fought. Enemies tried to stop her, but she swept them aside with barely a thought, silver light blazing from her hands. She burst into the great hall just as a soldier raised a sword to strike Kael from behind. Stop! The word came out as a command that shook the very stones. Everyone in the hall froze, literally froze, locked in place by sentinel power. Only Kael could still move, because the power recognized him as something Lyra cared about, someone she would never harm. He turned and stared at her, his sword dripping blood, his face covered in wounds and exhaustion. Lyra? His voice was barely a whisper. What happened to you? She looked down at her hands. They glowed with silver light. The broken pieces of her pendant hung in the air around her, orbiting like tiny moons. I found the truth, she said. All of it. And with those words, she released the power she'd been holding back. Silver light flooded the hall, touching every person present. And in that moment, Lyra used the sentinel gift to its fullest. She made them see. Every soldier, every noble, every conspirator, they all saw the truth. Valincrest's crimes laid bare. The corruption eating the kingdom from within, the lies the crown was built on. And more than that, they saw the consequences. The people who'd starved because of stolen taxes. The children who'd died for lack of medicine. The villages that had burned while nobles counted gold. They saw everything. When the light faded, the hall was silent. Then, one by one, Valincrest's soldiers dropped their weapons. They couldn't fight for a lie anymore, not after seeing the truth. Kael lowered his sword, staring at Lyra with something like awe. Is it over? He asked. Lyra felt the power still coursing through her, wild and barely controlled. She could feel every person in the fortress, every thread of corruption and deceit. No, she said softly. It's just beginning. Because now she understood what her ancestors had known. The crown wasn't just built on a lie. It was built on her bloodline's power, stolen, twisted, used to create the illusion of divine right. And she was the only one left who could tear that illusion down. or rebuild it into something true. The silence in the great hall stretched like a bowstring pulled to breaking. Kael stood frozen, sword still raised, blood dripping from a dozen wounds. Around him, Valencrest's soldiers remained locked in place by sentinel power, their faces twisted with the horror of truths they could no longer deny. The weapons they dropped lay scattered across the stone floor like fallen leaves. Lyra felt the power coursing through her veins, wild and intoxicating. She could feel every heartbeat in the room, every breath, every flicker of thought. The broken pieces of her pendant still orbited her hands, glowing with silver light that cast dancing shadows on the walls. She could destroy them all. Every conspirator, every traitor, every person who'd built their fortune on stolen bread and children's bones. One thought, one command, and she could end centuries of corruption in a single cleansing fire. The temptation was almost unbearable. "Lyra!" Kael's voice cut through the fury singing in her blood. He lowered his sword slowly, his storm-gray eyes locked on hers. "What are you going to do?" She looked at him. This man who'd trusted her when everyone else saw only a threat, who'd put his kingdom on the line to give her a chance. Blood matted his dark hair and ran down his face from a cut above his eye. His armor was dented and torn. He looked exhausted, hurt, but not afraid. Not of her. "I can see everything now," she said, and her voice echoed with harmonics that hadn't been there before. "Every lie, every betrayal, every crime they've committed. I can make them pay for all of it." "I know you can." Kael took a step toward her, and she felt the power recoil, recognizing him as someone it shouldn't harm. "But should you?" "They deserve it. After what they've done—" "Yes," Kael interrupted. "They do. But there are 200 people in this fortress right now who were just following orders, who had no idea what their leaders were really doing. Do they deserve to die too?" Lyra's hands clenched. The silver light flared brighter. "I can tell the difference. I can see who's guilty and who's innocent." "Can you? Can you really?" He was closer now, close enough that she could see the plea in his eyes. "My father used to say that absolute power doesn't corrupt. It reveals. It shows you who you really are when there's nothing left to stop you." He reached out slowly, his hand hovering near hers. "Who are you, Lyra? Are you a healer or an executioner?" The words hit her like a physical blow. She looked down at her glowing hands, at the power that could reshape kingdoms or burn them to ash, at the choice she'd claimed from the Sentinel's heart. In her mind, she saw her mother, not the distant memory she'd carried for 8 years, but something clearer, sharper, as if the power had unlocked forgotten moments. Her mother standing in their cottage, grinding herbs, teaching a young Lyra how to set a broken bone. "Sometimes the hardest thing about healing," her mother had said, "is knowing when to cut and when to let wounds close on their own. Too much intervention, and you do more harm than good. But too little, and the infection spreads." Lyra's mother had died to keep her safe, had burned rather than let the hunters take her daughter. Would she want Lyra to become the very thing those hunters feared, a weapon of vengeance and destruction, or would she want something else? The power pulsed, waiting for direction. Lyra could feel it testing her, measuring her, the same way it must have tested every sentinel who'd ever claimed it. To judge without mercy, even when mercy is what you desire. But mercy wasn't weakness. It was strength. The strength to choose restraint when destruction would be easier. Lyra took a deep breath and made her decision. The silver light began to dim. "I'm not going to kill them," she said quietly. Relief flooded Kael's face. "Then what? But I'm not letting them walk away either." She turned to face the frozen conspirators, raising her voice so everyone could hear. "You've all seen the truth now. You know what Valencrest and her allies have done. You know the kingdom you've been fighting for was built on lies and watered with innocent blood." The power shifted, responding to her intent. The soldiers began to move again, but slowly, as if pushing through thick water. They could hear her, could see her, but couldn't attack. "I could kill you," Lyra continued. "I should kill you, but that would make me just another tyrant using power to silence opposition. So instead, I'm going to do something my ancestors died for. I'm going to let you choose." She gestured, and the power flowed outward like a tide. Every person in the hall felt it touch them, gentle but inexorable. And with that touch came understanding, not just of what they'd done, but of what they could do differently. "You can keep fighting for a lie," Lyra said. You can defend corruption and murder because it's easier than admitting you were wrong. Or you can lay down your weapons and help us build something better, something honest. For a long moment, no one moved. Then a soldier near the back, young, maybe 19, wearing House Carrick's colors, dropped to his knees. I didn't know, he said, his voice breaking. I swear, I didn't know what they were doing. I just followed orders. Another soldier stepped forward, then another. One by one they knelt, laying their weapons on the ground. Fools! A voice rang out from the far side of the hall. A noble Lyra recognized, Lord Emmett, one of Valencrest's closest allies, pushed through the kneeling soldiers, his face twisted with rage. You're surrendering to a witch? To a girl who's bewitched the king? The only witchcraft here, Kyle said coldly, was the lies you used to steal from my people. Lies? Emmett laughed, a harsh, bitter sound. The entire kingdom is a lie. The crown you wear was bought with murder. Your ancestor was a butcher who slaughtered the rightful king and everyone who might have challenged him. He pointed at Lyra. The Sentinels knew it. That's why they had to die, because they could prove the truth, and truth destroys kingdoms. You're right, Lyra said, and the admission seemed to shock him more than any threat could have. The crown was stolen. The first king was a murderer. And my ancestors died because they refused to let that truth stay buried. She stepped forward, the silver light pulsing around her. But here's the difference between us, Lord Emmett. I'm not trying to bury the truth. I'm going to expose it, all of it. The stolen crown, the murdered sentinels, the centuries of corruption, and then we're going to build something new, something that doesn't need lies to hold it together. Emmett's face went pale. You'll start a civil war. Maybe, Kael said, moving to stand beside Lyra. Or maybe we'll finally give people a reason to believe in the crown again. Not because some charlatan 300 years ago claimed it was divine right, but because the king serves the kingdom instead of feeding off it. And if the nobles won't accept that, Emmett demanded, then they'll have to answer to me, Lyra said quietly. The pieces of her broken pendant stopped orbiting and reformed into a new shape, not a crescent moon but a crown of thorns that settled onto her head like a promise. I am the last sentinel. I see the truth of power, and I will judge any who try to return to the old ways. The weight of that statement hung in the air like smoke. Lord Emmett stared at her for a long moment. Then, slowly, he knelt. What would you have me do? Tell me where Valencrest is holding her prisoners, Lyra said, and then go to your lands and wait. When we're ready to try the conspirators publicly, you'll be called to testify. If you run, I'll find you. If you lie, I'll know. Do you understand? Yes, Sentinel. One by one, the remaining nobles knelt and swore the same oath. Some did it willingly, seeing a chance at redemption. Others did it out of fear, recognizing the power Lyra now wielded, but all of them bent the knee. All except the bodies of those who'd died fighting. Those lay scattered through the hall, testimony to the price of the day's violence. Kael surveyed the kneeling crowd, then turned to his remaining loyal soldiers. Secure the prisoners. Anyone who resists gets locked in the cells, not killed. We're done with summary executions. And get the wounded to the healers. He paused, swaying slightly. Sarah. Where's Sarah? In the archives, Lyra said, feeling the thread of life that connected to Kael's captain. She's hurt, but alive. I'll show you. Your Majesty. A soldier burst into the hall, breathing hard. The Outer Bailey. Valencrest's forces are retreating. They're abandoning their posts and fleeing the fortress. Kael straightened despite his wounds. How many? Maybe 50 men. The rest have surrendered or deserted. The soldier's eyes moved to Lyra, wide with something between fear and wonder. They're saying the sentinel has risen. That silver light filled the whole fortress, and everyone saw... He stopped, shaking his head as if unable to find words. They saw the truth, Lyra finished, just like you did. The soldier swallowed hard and nodded. Let them run, Kael said. We'll deal with them later. Right now, I want a head count of casualties and a full report on which nobles are still in the fortress. And someone bring me Lady Valencrest. I have questions for her. She's in the archives chamber, Lyra said. I left her pinned to the wall. She felt a flicker of guilt at that. She should still be alive. Should be? The power is harder to control than I expected. I wasn't trying to hurt her, just restrain her, but Lyra looked down at her hands, which still glowed faintly. I'm not entirely sure what I did to her. Kyle studied her for a moment, then he raised his voice to address the hall. Everyone capable of standing, follow me. We're going to end this properly. They found Valencrest exactly where Lyra had left her, pinned against the chamber wall by silver light that had hardened into something almost solid. The lady was conscious, barely, her face gray with pain or fear or both. Around her, the soldiers she'd brought lay crumpled on the floor, alive but unconscious. The sentinel's heart still floated above its pedestal at the chamber's center, pulsing gently, as if waiting. Kyle walked slowly around the chamber, taking it in. So this is what they killed for, what they hunted your bloodline to extinction to protect. It's a source, Lyra said, feeling the connection between the heart and the power now flowing through her veins. A well that sentinels could draw from. It amplifies our ability to see truth, to judge righteously, to enforce our will on reality itself. She looked at the floating sphere. My ancestors must have built this place, hidden it here in the mountains so it couldn't be destroyed. And Valencrest wanted it for herself. Kale stopped in front of the pinned woman. Didn't you? Valencrest's eyes focused on him with effort. When she spoke, her voice was a rasp. Not for myself. For survival. Explain. If the Sentinels returned with their full power, she coughed, and blood flecked her lips. They could tear down everything. The crown, the noble houses, the entire structure of the kingdom. I wasn't stealing. I was preparing, building resources to fight them if they ever came back. You were building resources to line your pockets, Kyle said coldly. Don't pretend this was noble. Weren't you listening? Valencrest's laugh turned into another cough. There is no noble. There never was. Your bloodline, my bloodline, all of us descend from thieves and murderers. The only difference is, some of us are honest about it. Lyra felt the power in the chamber responding to Valencrest's words, testing them against reality. And to her surprise, she felt no lie there. Valencrest actually believed what she was saying. Believed the kingdom couldn't survive without corruption, that honesty would destroy the fragile order holding everything together. You're wrong, Lyra said. Valencrest's eyes found hers. Am I? Look at what you've already done, girl. You've exposed the crown's origins. You've shattered the myth of divine right. Do you think the common people will just accept that and move on? Or do you think they'll rise up and tear down everything our ancestors built? If they do, Kael said, then maybe it deserved to be torn down. Easy to say when you have sentinel power backing you up. Valencrest's smile was grim. But what happens when she's gone? When the next king sits on that throne without a magical guardian? How long before the nobles start scheming again? How long before corruption returns? That's for future generations to figure out, Kael said. Our job is to clean up the mess you made. He gestured to Lyra. Release her, gently. Lyra focused, and the silver light holding Valencrest dissolved. The woman collapsed forward, caught by guards before she hit the ground. Take her to the cells, Kael ordered. Maximum security, and get a healer to check her. I want her alive for trial. As the guards dragged Valencrest away, she called back over her shoulder. You think this is over? You think imprisoning me ends it? Her laugh echoed off the stone walls. I'm just the beginning. When the other kingdoms hear what you've done here, exposing the crown's origins, letting a sentinel judge nobles, they'll see you as a threat. They'll come with armies, with assassins, with everything they have. Because if you succeed here, their own thrones become vulnerable. The guards pulled her through the doorway, and her voice faded. Kael stood in silence for a moment, then turned to Lyra. She's probably right about that. I know. Are you prepared for what comes next? For the weight of what you've taken on? Lyra looked at the sentinel's heart, still pulsing with ancient power. No, but I'll learn. That's all any of us can do. He swayed slightly, and Lyra realized just how much blood he'd lost during the fighting. You need a healer, she said. I need about 12 healers and a week of sleep. But first, he straightened with visible effort. First, I need to address the fortress. Make it clear that the coup is over and Valencrest's supporters have a choice. Submit to justice or face the consequences. You can barely stand. I've given speeches while bleeding before. Comes with the job. He managed a tired smile. Though, I'll admit, having you there might help. Seeing the last sentinel standing beside the king will send a message. What message? That this kingdom finally has someone who can hold the powerful accountable. That the days of corruption and lies are over. His expression grew serious. You saved us today, Lyra. Not just me, but everyone in this fortress who would have died if the fighting continued. Don't think I've forgotten that. Heat flooded her cheeks. I only did what needed to be done. That's what makes you dangerous, Kael said quietly. You're willing to do what needs to be done even when it costs you. That's the mark of either a great hero or a terrible tyrant. I'm betting on hero. Before she could respond, Sarah appeared in the doorway, leaning heavily on a soldier's shoulder. Her armor was torn, and blood stained her side, but her eyes were sharp as ever. Someone want to tell me what in all the hell's happened? She demanded. 1 minute I'm dying in the archives, the next everything goes silver, and I can see... She stopped, staring at Lyra. What are you? The same person I was before, Lyra said. Respectfully, that's horseshit. Sarah pushed away from the soldier supporting her and limped closer, studying Lyra's face. You've got light in your eyes that wasn't there this morning. And that crown, she gestured at the circlet of thorns. Where did that come from? The sentinel's heart, Lyra said, pointing at the floating sphere. I claimed it, and it changed me. Changed is an understatement, but Sarah's expression softened. Though I suppose if anyone could handle that kind of power without going mad, it would be you. You're too damn stubborn to let it corrupt you. I hope you're right. I'm always right. It's my most annoying quality. Sarah winced and pressed a hand to her side. Now someone want to help me find a healer before I bleed out? I've got a speech to watch. An hour later, the entire fortress gathered in the main courtyard. The sun was setting, painting the mountains in shades of gold and crimson. Bodies had been cleared from the stones, though bloodstains still marked where the fiercest fighting had occurred. Soldiers lined the walls. Kael's loyalists now reinforced by former conspirators who'd surrendered. Kael stood on the steps leading to the great hall, bandaged but upright. Lyra stood beside him, the crown of thorns catching the dying light. Behind them, Sarah and the remaining commanders formed a silent wall of authority. Below, hundreds of faces looked up, soldiers, servants, nobles, merchants who'd been trapped in the fortress during the siege, all of them waiting to hear what came next. Kael's voice rang out across the courtyard, amplified by the stone walls. Today, this fortress nearly fell, not to an outside enemy, but to corruption from within, to nobles who put their own wealth above the kingdom's welfare, to conspirators who murdered a king and thought they could do it again. A murmur ran through the crowd. But they failed, Kael continued. They failed because good people stood against them, because soldiers remembered their oaths, because a young woman from a village most of you have never heard of refused to let lies go unchallenged. He gestured to Lyra. You've all heard stories about the Sentinels, probably believed they were myths, but I'm here to tell you they were real, and one of them stands before you now. Lyra felt every eye turn to her. The weight of their stares was almost physical. The Sentinel bloodline, Kael said, was hunted to extinction 300 years ago because my ancestor, the first king, feared what they represented. They could see truth, they could judge power, and they could prove that the crown he wore was stolen through murder and treachery. Shocked silence. Then voices rising in disbelief and anger. Kael raised his hand and the noise subsided. I know what you're thinking. If the crown was stolen, if the royal bloodline has no divine right, then what gives me the authority to rule? And the answer is simple. Nothing. Nothing but your consent and my willingness to serve the kingdom rather than exploit it. He let that sink in. Starting today, things change. The conspirators will be tried publicly. Their crimes will be exposed. Any noble found guilty of corruption will lose their lands and titles. And anyone who objects, anyone who tries to return to the old ways, will answer to the last sentinel. Lyra stepped forward. I don't want to rule you, she said, projecting her voice as best she could. I'm a healer, not a queen, but I will protect you. From corrupt nobles, from lying kings, From anyone who tries to build power on your suffering. The silver light around her hands brightened. That's the promise the Sentinels made 300 years ago, and it's the promise I'm making now. For a long moment, the courtyard was silent. Then a voice called out from the crowd. What about us, the ones who fought for Valencrest? It was one of the soldiers who'd surrendered earlier, still wearing House Carrick's colors. Do we hang? That depends, Kale said. Did you know what your leaders were doing? Did you participate in theft, murder, corruption? No, Your Majesty. I swear it. I just followed orders. Then you'll be given a choice, Kael said. Swear a new oath to serve the kingdom and its people rather than any noble house. Except that your first loyalty is to justice, not to whoever pays your wages. Do that, and you can stay. Refuse, and you'll be stripped of your position and sent home. Another voice from the crowd. And if we don't trust the Sentinel? If we think she's just another tyrant with power? Lyra's first instinct was anger. After everything she had done, everything she'd sacrificed. But then she remembered her mother's words about healing, about knowing when to cut and when to let wounds close on their own. Then watch me, she said simply. Judge me by my actions, not my power. If I become what you fear, if I start using this gift to control rather than protect, then I give you permission to call me out, to resist, to fight back. She met the questioner's eyes. That's what my ancestors died for, the right to speak truth to power. I won't dishonor their memory by taking that right away from you. The man stared at her for a moment. Then, slowly, he nodded. Others in the crowd began to nod as well. Not everyone. There were still plenty of suspicious faces, still fear and doubt. But it was a start. Kale raised his voice again. We have work to do, bodies to bury, wounds to tend, a fortress to secure. But today, we've proven something important, that corruption can be fought, that justice can prevail, that we don't have to accept lies just because they're comfortable. He paused, his eyes sweeping the crowd. My ancestor stole this crown, but I'm going to earn it, one honest decision at a time, and if I fail, if I fall back into the old ways, then the Sentinel will judge me just as harshly as any other. That's the deal. That's the new order. He drew his sword and held it high. For the kingdom! For the kingdom! The soldiers echoed, their voices rolling across the courtyard like thunder. Lyra felt something shift in that moment. Not physically, but deeper, in the threads of power that connected people to their rulers, subjects to their kingdom. The old bonds built on lies and fear were fraying, being replaced by something more fragile but more honest. It might not last. It might all fall apart tomorrow. But for now, for this moment, it was enough. Late that night, after the speeches and the work and the endless aftermath of battle, Lyra finally found herself alone. She stood on the battlements overlooking the mountains, watching stars emerge in the darkening sky. The crown of thorns rested lightly on her head, no longer feeling foreign. The power still hummed in her veins, vast and terrible and hers. She heard footsteps behind her. Kale joined her at the wall, moving stiffly, his wounds properly bandaged now. Couldn't sleep? He asked. Too much in my head. She glanced at him. You should be resting. So should you. But here we are. He leaned against the wall with a wince. I wanted to thank you, properly, without an audience. You already thanked me. Not for saving my life, though I'm grateful for that too. He turned to face her fully. I mean for making the choice you did. Down in that chamber, with all that power at your fingertips, you could have destroyed everyone who'd ever wronged you, could have burned this whole fortress to the ground and walked away justified. I thought about it, Lyra admitted. I know, I could see it in your eyes. That's what scared me. He smiled faintly. But you chose restraint, chose to build instead of destroy. That's the difference between a sentinel and a tyrant. Valencrest was right about one thing, Lyra said. Other kingdoms won't like what we're doing here. They'll see it as a threat to their own power structures. Then we'll deal with them when they come. Kale's hand found hers on the wall, his fingers warm despite the cold night air. Together. Lyra looked down at their joined hands. Something had changed between them, subtle but undeniable. Maybe it had been changing since that first day in the throne room, or maybe it had happened in the chapel when they talked about fear and strength. Or maybe it was happening right now, in this quiet moment after the storm. I don't know how to be what people need me to be, she said softly. I'm just a village healer who happened to inherit power she doesn't understand. You're not just anything anymore, Kael said. You're the woman who stood against corruption and won, who changed the course of a kingdom in a single day, who gave people hope that things could be different. He squeezed her hand. But you're also still Lyra, still the person who cares more about healing than hurting. Don't lose that, no matter how heavy the crown gets. She met his eyes. In the starlight, the storm gray looked almost silver. What happens now? Now? Kael smiled, and for the first time since she'd met him, it reached his eyes. Now we do the impossible. We rebuild a kingdom on truth instead of lies. We hold the powerful accountable. We try to create something worth protecting. That's a lot of work. Yes, but I've learned something today. I don't have to do it alone anymore. His thumb traced small circles on the back of her hand. Neither do you. For a moment, they just stood there, hands joined, looking out over the mountains. The fortress was quiet now, the day's violence fading into memory. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new threats, new battles. But tonight, there was peace and possibility, and something that felt dangerously close to hope. Lyra turned to face Kael fully and found him already looking at her. The space between them felt charged, alive with unspoken questions. Kael, she began. He leaned forward and kissed her. It was gentle, questioning, as if asking permission even as he took it. Lyra's breath caught. Then she leaned into it, one hand moving to his chest, where she could feel his heart hammering as hard as her own. When they finally pulled apart, both were breathing hard. I've wanted to do that since the chapel, Kael admitted. Possibly since the day you stopped Valencrest at the banquet. Maybe even before then. Why didn't you? Because I'm a king and you're a sentinel, and I thought mixing duty with anything else would be a terrible idea. He smiled ruefully. Turns out almost dying makes you rethink your priorities. Lyra laughed, surprising herself. After everything, the violence, the fear, the weight of power, she could still laugh. So what are your priorities now? Rebuilding the kingdom, earning the crown, and he cupped her face in his hands, not letting you face this alone. Whatever we are, whatever this becomes, we're in it together. Together, Lyra agreed. They kissed again, longer this time, and Lyra felt something settle in her chest. Not the burden of power or the weight of responsibility, but something simpler and more profound. Connection. Someone who understood what she carried, who wouldn't ask her to be anything other than herself. When they finally separated, Kael's expression grew serious. There's something else. Something I need to tell you before this goes any further. Lyra's stomach tightened. What? If we do this, if we become what I think we both want to become, it won't be easy. The nobles will use it against us. They'll say you've enchanted me, that I'm weak, that the sentinel is controlling the throne. He met her eyes. I don't care what they say, but you need to know what you're walking into. I already walked into it, Lyra said. The moment I claimed the sentinel's heart, I became a target. Whether I stand beside you or not won't change that. Then stand beside me. It wasn't a command, but a plea. Help me build something better, not as king and subject, but as equals. Lyra thought about what that would mean. The scrutiny, the danger, the endless work of reshaping a kingdom. And she thought about standing alone, isolated by her power, watching from the sidelines while others tried to fix what was broken. The choice wasn't hard. Equals, she said, and sealed it with another kiss. Ishek. Below them, in the fortress cells, Lady Valencrest sat in darkness and smiled. They thought they'd won, thought exposing the truth would change everything. But truth was just another weapon, and she knew how to use it. Let them have their moment of triumph. Let them believe justice had prevailed. Because in 3 weeks, messengers would arrive from the other kingdoms. In a month, armies would gather at the borders. In 6 months, the fragile new order would shatter under the weight of threats from without and resistance from within. And when that happened, when everything they'd built collapsed, she would be waiting. Because power didn't come from crowns or magic or noble speeches. It came from patience, from knowing when to strike, from understanding that every victory planted the seeds of its own destruction. Valencrest closed her eyes and settled in to wait. The game was far from over. 3 months after the coup, on the first truly warm day of spring, Lyra Thornwell stood in the throne room of Ironhold and watched history being made. The chamber was packed. Every noble house in the kingdom had sent representatives, some willingly, others under barely concealed duress. Merchants and guild leaders filled the galleries. Common folk crowded the back, craning their necks to see. Even ambassadors from neighboring kingdoms stood along the walls, watching with calculating eyes. At the center of it all, Kael sat on the wolf throne, wearing the crown his ancestor had stolen 300 years ago. But his posture was different now, less rigid, more open, as if the weight had shifted from his shoulders to somewhere he could actually carry it. And beside the throne, on a newly constructed seat of carved silver, sat Lyra. Not on the throne itself, that would have sent the wrong message, implying she sought to rule, but beside it, equal in height, making it clear she was neither subject nor servant, but something else entirely: witness, guardian, judge. The sentinel. The crown of thorns rested on her head, catching the light from high windows. The pieces of her broken pendant had reformed into a new shape, a star with 8 points that hung at her throat, pulsing gently with silver light. She could feel the sentinel's heart even from here, 3 levels below, thrumming with power that flowed through her veins like a second heartbeat. She could also feel the tension in the room, the fear, the hope, the desperate uncertainty. Today's trial would set the precedent for everything that came after. "Bring in the accused," Kael said, his voice carrying through the chamber. Guards escorted Lady Valencrest through the crowd. She walked with her head high, chains jangling at her wrists, her silver hair braided with prison-induced simplicity. But her eyes were sharp, missing nothing. Behind her came 6 other nobles, Lord Emmet and the remaining conspirators who'd survived the coup, all chained, all facing judgment. They stood before the throne, and the room fell silent. "Lady Valencrest," Kael began, "you stand accused of high treason, conspiracy to commit murder, theft from the royal treasury, and the assassination of my father, King Marcus Dravenhart. How do you answer?" Valencrest met his gaze without flinching. "Guilty on all counts, Your Majesty. I won't insult anyone's intelligence by denying it." A murmur ran through the crowd. Lyra had expected defiance, or at least an attempt at justification, but Valencrest's calm admission caught everyone off guard. "Then you accept the punishment?" Kael asked. "I accept the consequences of my choices," Valencrest said, "which isn't quite the same thing, but yes, I understand that I will likely hang." "Likely?" Kael's expression hardened. "You murdered a king. You stole from the people you were sworn to protect. You nearly destroyed this kingdom. There's no likely about it." "Perhaps?" Valencrest's gaze shifted to Lyra. "But that depends on her, doesn't it? The last sentinel, the one who sees all truths. Tell me, girl, what do you see when you look at me?" Lyra felt every eye turn to her. The pendant grew warm against her skin. She could feel the threads of power connecting Valencrest to the kingdom, decades of influence, carefully constructed networks, loyalties bought and sold. She could see the murders, the thefts, the quiet cruelties, but she could also see something else, something that made her hesitate. "I see a woman who believed she was saving the kingdom," Lyra said slowly, "who thought corruption was the only way to maintain order, who murdered to prevent what she believed would be a greater catastrophe." "And?" Valencrest prompted. "And I see that you were wrong, utterly, completely wrong. Your corruption didn't save the kingdom. It poisoned it, made it weak, made it vulnerable to the very chaos you claim to prevent." "Spoken like someone who's had power for 3 months, Valencrest said. "Come back in 30 years and tell me if you still believe that." "I will," Lyra said, "because unlike you, I'm not trying to control the kingdom. I'm trying to serve it." "Naive," Valencrest said, but there was no heat in it, just weariness. "You'll learn. Power demands compromise. Idealism gets people killed." "So does corruption," Kael interjected, "which is why you're here." He stood, and the room went silent again. "Lady Valencrest, I sentence you to death for your crimes. You'll hang at sunset, and may whatever comes after judge you more mercifully than I can." Valencrest nodded as if she'd expected nothing else. "One request, Your Majesty." "You're in no position to make requests." "Not for me, for them." She gestured to the other chained nobles. They followed my lead. Some knew what they were doing, others didn't, but punishing all of them equally would be a mistake. You need experienced administrators to rebuild what I tore down. Killing us all just creates a power vacuum. Kale's jaw tightened. You want me to show mercy to traitors? I want you to be practical. Justice without wisdom is just revenge wearing a crown. Valencrest's eyes moved to Lyra again. Ask your sentinel. Let her see which of them acted from greed and which from fear. Judge accordingly. That's what she's here for, isn't it? The room fell silent, waiting. Lyra stood slowly. The power flowing through her sharpened, focusing. She walked down the steps from her seat and approached the chained nobles. Lord Emmett met her eyes with defiance. The two beside him, lesser nobles whose names she'd learned during the investigation, looked terrified. The remaining three stared at the floor. She reached out, not physically, but with the sentinel gift, and touched their souls. The visions came fast and brutal. Emmett, greed, ambition, murder without remorse. He'd known exactly what he was doing and enjoyed the power it brought. The two terrified nobles, coercion. Valencrest had threatened their families, forced their cooperation. They'd hated every moment but saw no way out. The three staring at the floor, willing participants who'd turned a blind eye to the worst crimes in exchange for profit. Not murderers, but enablers. Complicit through silence. Lyra opened her eyes and turned to Kael. Two of them were forced. They acted under duress. Valencrest threatened to kill their families if they didn't cooperate. 3 others profited but didn't participate in the murders. And Lord Emmett, she looked at the defiant noble. He knew everything, chose everything, enjoyed it. Emmett's defiance cracked. You're lying. You're making this up to... Am I? Lyra's voice cut through his protest like a blade. Should I tell everyone here what you did to that merchant's daughter in Westmarch? The one who disappeared after refusing to sell you her father's lands. Emmett's face went white. That's what I thought, Lyra said quietly. She turned back to Kael. The 2 who acted under duress should be released with restrictions, house arrest until they've proven trustworthy. The 3 who profited should lose their titles and lands, but keep their lives. They can earn redemption through service. And Emmett? Kael asked. Hangs beside Valencrest. The room erupted in noise, some shouting approval, others protesting. Kael let it build for a moment, then raised his hand for silence. So be it, he said. The sentinel has spoken. Her judgment is final. Your Majesty, one of the ambassadors called out, a man from the eastern kingdom of Talmar, wearing rich red silks. With respect, this sets a dangerous precedent. Allowing a single individual to judge nobles without trial. There was a trial, Kael said. You're watching it, and the sentinel's judgment is more reliable than any jury because she can actually see the truth instead of guessing at it. That's exactly the problem, the ambassador said. What stops her from lying, from claiming she sees crimes that never happened? You're asking us to trust one woman with absolute power. You trusted Valencrest with power for decades, Lyra said, her voice carrying across the room. And look what that got you. At least with me, you know I can't hide. My gift is public. My judgments are witnessed. If I abuse this power, everyone will see it happen. And who judges you? The ambassador demanded. You do, Lyra said simply. All of you. Every time I make a judgment, you get to decide if it's just. If enough people believe I've become tyrannical, they'll resist. They'll fight. And eventually, someone will find a way to stop me. She met the ambassador's eyes. That's the deal. I hold the powerful accountable, and you hold me accountable. It's not perfect, but it's better than the alternative. The ambassador looked like he wanted to argue further, but couldn't find the words. Kael spoke into the silence. I know this is uncomfortable. I know it's scary to have someone who can see your secrets, but discomfort isn't the same as tyranny. And right now, this kingdom needs honesty more than it needs comfort. He gestured to the guards. Take them to the cells. Valencrest and Emmett hang at sunset. The others will be dealt with according to the sentinel's judgment. As the guards led the prisoners away, Valencrest paused at the door and looked back at Lyra. I hope you're right, she said quietly. I hope this works. Because if it doesn't, the backlash will make what I did look like mercy. Then she was gone, leaving only the echo of her words. The execution was held in the main courtyard as the sun touched the mountains. Half the fortress turned out to watch. Lyra stood on the battlements, unwilling to witness the deaths up close, but feeling the need to bear witness nonetheless. Valencrest and Emmett were led to the scaffold. Emmett fought and cursed, had to be dragged up the steps. But Valencrest walked calmly, her head high, looking for all the world like a queen approaching her throne. At the last moment, she looked up and found Lyra on the battlements. Their eyes met across the distance. Valencrest smiled, not with malice or hatred, but with something almost like respect, as if to say, "You won this round, but the game goes on." Then the trapdoors opened, and it was over. Lyra turned away, her stomach churning. She'd sentenced them to death with her judgment, but that didn't make watching it easier. Kyle found her a few minutes later, standing alone in a shadowed alcove. "You all right?" he asked. "No." She leaned against the stone wall. "I just killed 2 people." "You judged 2 people who'd killed dozens. There's a difference." "Is there?" "Because it doesn't feel that way." Kale was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "My father once told me that the weight of a crown isn't the gold. It's the decisions you can never take back. The people you have to hurt to protect others." He touched her shoulder. "That weight doesn't get lighter. You just get better at carrying it." "I don't want to get better at this." "I know, but that's exactly why you should." He turned her to face him. "Because you'll never become comfortable with it. You'll never start enjoying it. That's what keeps you from becoming what Valencrest was." Lyra wanted to believe that, needed to believe that. She leaned into him and he wrapped his arms around her. They stood there as the sun set and the first stars appeared. 2 people carrying weights too heavy for one person, finding strength in sharing the burden. The weeks that followed were brutal. News of the trial spread across the kingdom like wildfire. Some celebrated. Finally, the corrupt were being held accountable. But others reacted with fear and anger. Nobles who'd built their power on shady dealings suddenly found themselves under scrutiny. Several fled their lands rather than face judgment. A few tried to organize resistance. Lyra traveled with Kyle to every major city, conducting trials, exposing corruption, dismantling networks that had operated unchallenged for generations. The crown of thorns never left her head. The pendant at her throat pulsed constantly with the weight of truth after truth. She saw terrible things: murder, slavery, children sold for profit, entire villages bled dry by greedy lords. Each revelation made her angrier, each judgment heavier. But she also saw hope. In the northern provinces, freed from the burden of impossible taxes, farmers began to thrive. Markets reopened. Children who would have starved made it through the winter. In the eastern cities, corrupt trade ministers were replaced by honest merchants, and suddenly goods flowed freely instead of being hoarded. Slowly, impossibly, the kingdom began to heal. Not everywhere, not all at once. There were setbacks and failures and moments when Lyra wondered if they were just creating a different kind of tyranny. But then she'd see something: a child running through a market with bread they'd actually been able to buy, or a farmer standing straighter because they no longer feared arbitrary taxation, or a woman speaking freely in a town square without looking over her shoulder. And she'd remember why this mattered. 6 months after the coup, ambassadors from 3 neighboring kingdoms arrived at Ironhold with a formal demand. The sentinel must be removed, or the kingdoms would consider Kyle's rule illegitimate. The meeting took place in the throne room, tense and formal. "You're destabilizing the entire region," the ambassador from Talmar said, the same man who'd objected during Valencrest's trial. "Nobles in our kingdoms are demanding sentinels of their own. Commoners are questioning royal authority. You've started something you can't control." "Good," Kale said flatly. "Maybe it's time those questions were asked. You're risking war. Then we'll fight. But I won't return to the old ways just because it makes your kings comfortable." The ambassador's expression hardened. "You realize we could crush you? 3 kingdoms against 1? You'd last maybe a year." "Maybe," Lyra said, speaking for the first time. "Or maybe your soldiers would lay down their weapons when they see the truth of what they're fighting for." She stood, the crown of thorns glinting in the light. "I can show them what their kings have done. The corruption, the lies, the innocent blood. Do you really want to risk your armies seeing that?" That's a threat. It's a fact. Lyra moved closer to the ambassadors. You're afraid, not of war, but of truth. You're afraid your own people will realize they don't need kings who rule through divine right mythology. They just need honest governance. And you think you can provide that? The ambassador from Valdris, a western kingdom known for its rigid nobility, asked mockingly. One sentinel overseeing an entire kingdom? You'll burn out in a year or become exactly what you claim to hate. Maybe, Lyra admitted. I'm not perfect. I'll make mistakes, but at least I'm trying, which is more than your kings can say. The ambassadors exchanged glances. Then the one from Talmar spoke. We'll give you 1 year. 1 year to prove this experiment works. If it fails, if your kingdom descends into chaos, if the sentinel proves tyrannical, we'll intervene, militarily if necessary. And if we succeed, Kael asked, then we'll have a very different conversation. The ambassador's expression was unreadable, though I suspect success will create its own problems. After they left, Kael turned to Lyra. They're right, about the pressure, about the risk of burnout. I know. We need to find more sentinels, or train people who can do similar work, investigators, judges who can root out corruption without magic. He ran a hand through his hair. We can't rely on you forever. I've been thinking the same thing. Lyra touched the pendant at her throat. The sentinel's heart isn't unique. There are probably other sources, other ways to access this power. If I can find them, that's a project for later, Kael said. Right now, we have more immediate concerns. Like what? He pulled a letter from his coat and handed it to her. This arrived this morning, from Greyhaven. Lyra's heart leaped. She'd sent word to her village months ago, letting them know she was alive and safe, but hadn't heard back. Travel was still dangerous, and correspondence between a fortress and a distant frontier village wasn't exactly reliable. She unfolded the letter with trembling hands. It was from old Marin, his handwriting shaky but legible. Lyra, the whole village talks about you now. Some still scared, but most proud. Little Bess asks about you every day. Says she wants to be a sentinel when she grows up. Your cottage is still there. Kept it clean in case you come back. But we understand if you don't. You've got bigger things now. Just wanted you to know, you'll always have a home here if you need one. Maron. Lyra's eyes burned. She blinked rapidly, refusing to cry in front of the entire court. Kael read over her shoulder. When's the last time you went back? I haven't. There's been too much to do here. Take a week, he said. Go home. Remember who you were before all this. You'll need that anchor. I can't just leave. Yes, you can. Sarah can keep things running here. The trials are mostly done. The major conspirators are dealt with. He touched her cheek. You've been carrying this weight for 6 months without a break. If you don't rest, you will burn out. And then the ambassador's prediction comes true. Lyra wanted to argue, but the truth was she was exhausted. Bone-deep tired in a way sleep couldn't fix. The constant use of power, the endless parade of corruption and suffering, the weight of judgment after judgment, it was grinding her down. 1 week, she said. 1 week, Kael agreed. And then you come back, and we keep building. The journey to Greyhaven took 3 days. Lyra traveled with a small escort, Sarah and 2 guards, all on horseback. She'd argued for going alone, but Kael had refused. You're too important to risk, he'd said, and too stubborn to trust not to do something heroically stupid. As they rode through the mountain passes, Lyra felt something inside her begin to loosen. Out here, away from the fortress and the constant demands of power, she could almost pretend she was just a woman on a journey. Almost. The crown of thorns remained on her head, visible to everyone they passed. Farmers in the fields stopped working to stare. Village children pointed and whispered. At a roadside inn where they stopped for the night, the innkeeper refused payment, saying it was an honor to host the last sentinel. Even here, she couldn't escape what she'd become. But as the familiar landscape of her home region came into view, the rocky hills, the scraggly pines, the winding creek where she'd learned to catch fish as a child, something in her chest unclenched. They crested the final hill just before sunset, and Greyhaven spread out below them. It looked exactly the same cluster of cottages, the same market square, the same stone well where she'd once treated Lord Carrick's fake fever, but different too. cleaner somehow, healthier, as if a weight had been lifted. They rode down into the village, and people began to emerge from their homes. Not running, not afraid, just curious. Lyra dismounted in the square, her legs shaky after days of riding. Then someone called her name. A little girl broke from the crowd, Bess, the child she'd treated for fever all those months ago. She'd grown, her face rounder, her eyes brighter. "Lyra!" Bess threw her arms around Lyra's waist. "You came back!" Lyra knelt and hugged her tightly. "Of course I did. I promised, didn't I?" "You're famous now," Bess said, pulling back to stare at the crown of thorns. "Everyone says you're going to save the whole kingdom." "I'm trying," Lyra said, "but I needed to come home first, to remember what I'm saving." More people approached. Old Maron, leaning heavily on a cane but smiling. The baker. The blacksmith. Mothers whose children she'd delivered. Farmers whose injuries she'd treated. They didn't bow or kneel, they just welcomed her home. Maron gripped her hand. "You look tired, girl." "I am tired." "Then rest. Your cottage is ready. Everything's like you left it." He paused. "Well, except we added a new bed. Yours was pretty worn out." Lyra laughed, and it felt like breathing after holding her breath for months. "Thank you." That night she slept in her old cottage for the first time in half a year. The walls were the same. The smell was the same, dried herbs and wood smoke. Even the view from her window was unchanged. But she was different. She lay awake for a long time, staring at the ceiling, the crown of thorns resting on the table beside her bed. She'd thought coming home would help her remember who she was. Instead, it made her realize how much she'd changed. The girl who'd lived here, who'd ground herbs and set bones and worried about winter supplies, felt like a stranger now. The power had changed her. Not corrupted her, but transformed her into something other than human, something that could never truly go back to the simple life she'd once known. The realization should have been devastating. Instead, it felt like acceptance. She wasn't that girl anymore, but she could still carry what that girl had valued: compassion, service, the desire to heal rather than harm, just on a much larger scale. In the morning, she walked through the village with Bess, letting the child show her everything that had changed. "The new tax collector is really nice," Bess said. "He only takes what's fair, and he brings medicine from the city. And the hunters don't come anymore. They're scared of you." "Good," Lyra said. "They should be." They stopped at the graveyard, and Lyra knelt before her mother's marker, a simple stone with just a name and dates. "I did it, Mama," she whispered. "I became what you were protecting me from. But I'm using it right. I promise." The wind rustled through the pines, and for just a moment, Lyra could have sworn she felt her mother's hand on her shoulder. Then the moment passed, and she stood. Sarah approached, her expression serious. "Rider coming in fast. Royal colors." They met the messenger in the square. He dismounted, breathing hard, and bowed to Lyra. "Sentinel, His Majesty needs you back at Ironhold, immediately." Lyra's stomach dropped. "What's wrong?" "The ambassadors' kingdoms have formed an alliance. They're mobilizing armies. The king believes we have maybe 2 weeks before they cross the border." The fragile peace shattered. Lyra looked around at Greyhaven, at the people who'd welcomed her home, the child holding her hand, the cottage where she'd almost been able to pretend she was just a healer again. Then she looked at the messenger. "Tell His Majesty I'm on my way." She knelt before Bess one last time. "I have to go." "I know." Bess hugged her fiercely. "But you'll come back, right? After you save the kingdom?" "I'll try," Lyra said. It was the best promise she could make. The ride back to Ironhold took 2 days of hard travel. They arrived to find the fortress in controlled chaos, soldiers drilling, supplies being stockpiled, war preparations underway. Kael met her in the courtyard, and the relief on his face was palpable. "Thank the gods. I wasn't sure the messenger would reach you in time." "How bad is it?" 3 armies converging from 3 directions. Maybe 15,000 men total." He gestured for her to follow him into the war room. "We have 5,000, counting militia, and most of them have never seen real battle." The war room was packed with commanders, maps spread across the table showing the approaching armies. "We can hold the fortress for a while," Sarah said, pointing to defensive positions. But we can't stop 3 armies. Not if they coordinate. Then we don't fight them, Lyra said. Everyone turned to stare at her. Explain, Kael said. Lyra moved to the map, her mind racing. They're not coming to conquer. They're coming to make a point, to show that kingdoms can't be reformed, that any attempt to change the system will be crushed. It's about fear, not territory. So how do we stop them? We take away their reason to fight. She looked up at Kael. I show their soldiers the truth. You want to use your power on entire armies? Not all at once. I'm not strong enough for that. Lyra touched the pendant at her throat. But I don't need to reach everyone. Just enough. Enough soldiers questioning their orders, enough uncertainty, enough doubt about whether this war is just, and the coalition falls apart. That's insane, one of the commanders said. You'd have to get close enough to touch them with your power. That means going into the enemy camp. Then that's what I'll do. Absolutely not, Kael said. If they capture you, they won't, because I'll have you with me. She met his eyes. We ride out under a flag of parley. Demand to speak to the army commanders. And while they're deciding whether to honor the parley, I show them what they're really fighting for. The room erupted in argument. Half the commanders thought it was suicide. The other half thought it was brilliant. Kael held up his hand for silence. Then he turned to Lyra. If we do this and it fails, we lose everything. The kingdom, our lives, any hope of reform. If we don't do it and fight instead, we lose anyway, Lyra said. This is the only chance we have. Kael was quiet for a long moment. Then he nodded. Then we ride at dawn. They left Ironhold with 50 riders, enough to look official, not enough to seem threatening. Kael and Lyra rode at the front, wearing full armor, the banners of both crown and sentinel snapping in the wind. The enemy armies had converged 5 miles from the fortress, in a wide valley perfect for massing troops. 15,000 soldiers in neat formations, their banners a riot of color and threat. As Kael's group approached under the white flag of parley, the enemy armies stirred like a disturbed hive. They were met halfway by a delegation of commanders, hard-faced men wearing expensive armor, clearly noble-born and not happy about this interruption. King Kael, the commander from Talmar, said coldly, we're surprised you came out to meet us. We expected you to hide behind your walls and let your sentinel witch do your fighting. She's not a witch, Kael said, and I don't hide. I came to offer you one last chance to turn back. Turn back? The commander from Valdris laughed. You have 5,000 men. We have 15,000. This isn't a negotiation. You're right, Lyra said, urging her horse forward. It's not. She removed her helmet, letting the crown of thorns gleam in the sunlight. I am Lyra Thornwell, last sentinel of the true bloodline. I see through lies. I judge power. And I'm offering every soldier in your armies a choice. We don't negotiate with, the Talmar commander began. Lyra raised her hand and silver light exploded from the pendant. It didn't hit the commanders. She didn't need to hurt them. Instead, it spread outward like a wave, washing over the front ranks of the enemy armies. And with it came vision. Every soldier touched by the light saw the truth of their kingdoms, the corruption of their nobles, the lies they'd been told about why they were here, the innocent people who would die if this war continued. They saw everything Lyra had seen, every crime, every injustice, every drop of blood spilled to protect power instead of people. The wave of light continued spreading, touching more and more soldiers, hundreds, thousands. Lyra felt the strain immediately. This was more power than she'd ever channeled before, spread over more people. The sentinel's heart beneath Ironhold thrummed in response, sending strength through the connection, but it wasn't enough. She was burning out. But she kept going, because this was what sentinels did. They showed truth even when it cost them everything. The light finally faded. Lyra swayed in her saddle, barely staying upright. In the valley below, the enemy armies stood frozen. Then, one by one, soldiers began to drop their weapons. Not all of them, not even most, but enough to make the difference. The Talmar commander stared in horror at his troops. What have you done? Given them a choice, Lyra gasped. Something you never did. This is witchcraft, sorcery. Men, seize them. But the soldiers weren't listening anymore. Those who'd been touched by the light were talking to those who hadn't, sharing what they'd seen. Arguments broke out. Formations dissolved into chaos. The Valdris commander drew his sword. "If we can't have order, we'll have vengeance. Kill the sentinel," he charged. Kale moved to intercept, but he was too slow. The blade was aimed directly at Lyra's heart. She didn't have the strength to defend herself. The power was gone, used up, leaving her hollow. This was it. Then Sarah appeared from nowhere, her sword flashing, parrying the strike. "I don't think so." The two commanders and Sarah fought, 3 blades moving too fast to follow. Around them, chaos reigned as Kael's 50 riders clashed with enemy soldiers trying to restore order. Lyra tried to stay in her saddle, tried to help, but darkness was creeping in at the edges of her vision. She heard Kael shouting her name. Then she was falling, the ground rushing up to meet her. She woke 3 days later in her chambers at Ironhold. Kael sat beside her bed, his head resting on his arms, asleep. He looked terrible, bruised, exhausted, like he hadn't moved in days. Lyra tried to speak, but her throat was too dry. The sound of her stirring woke him. His head snapped up, and relief flooded his face. "You're awake. Thank the gods you're awake." "What happened?" she croaked. He poured water and helped her drink. "You burned yourself out. Channeled so much power that you nearly died. The healers said your heart stopped twice." "The armies?" "Dissolved. After you showed them the truth, half the soldiers deserted. The other half refused to fight. The kingdoms had no choice but to withdraw." A smile tugged at his lips. "You did it, Lyra. You stopped the war without a battle." "And the commanders?" "The one from Valdris died. Sarah killed him when he tried to finish you off. The others retreated with what was left of their forces." Kael's hand found hers. "The ambassadors are furious, but they can't do anything. Their own soldiers won't fight this war." Lyra closed her eyes, relief washing over her. "Is it over?" "This part, yes. But there will be more challenges. There always are." He squeezed her hand. "But we'll face them together." About 6 months later, Lyra stood in the same courtyard where Valencrest had been executed and watched as the first class of new judges took their oaths. They weren't sentinels. She'd searched but found no others of her bloodline. Instead, they were people she'd trained personally, teaching them to investigate, to question, to hold the powerful accountable even without magic. It wasn't perfect. They couldn't see truth the way she could, but they could do the work, could continue the reforms even when she wasn't there. It was a start. Kael stood beside her, his hand warm in hers. In a month, they'd be married. Not because tradition demanded it, but because they'd chosen it. 2 people bound by love and shared purpose, building something new together. The kingdom was healing, slowly, imperfectly, but healing. And Lyra, once a simple village healer, now the last sentinel, had found her place in it. Not as a tyrant, not as a weapon, but as a guardian, a witness, someone who would spend her life making sure power served the people instead of feeding on them. It was exhausting work, dangerous work, work that would probably kill her eventually. But it was also the most important work she'd ever done, and she wouldn't trade it for anything. As the sun set over Ironhold's mountains, painting the sky in gold and crimson, Lyra felt the sentinel's heart pulse beneath the fortress, steady and strong, waiting for the next generation who would carry its burden. But for now, for this moment, the weight was hers, and she was ready to bear it. Together with Kael, together with the kingdom they were reshaping, she would build something worth protecting, not a lie covered in gold, but truth forged in fire. A new age had begun.